How to Manage Your Money When You Don't Have Any. Self-published for the Amazon Kindle. This book is looking for a publisher. If you are interested in representing it or publishing it in any form, please email your financial mission at gmail.com. Since the beginning of the Great Recession, gallons of ink have been spilled trying to create cosmic justice for past sins and present economic inequities. For those of us damaged by the disaster, much of that passion feels like wasted time and energy. This isn't one of those books. This book is for the disheartened reader who, for whatever reason, is having trouble remembering their life before they felt financially out of control. While this book offers no solutions to make corporations behave like decent, ethical people, it does offer a simple, clear path toward a more stable financial existence for those willing to accept it. Readers of all income levels can find its simple financial plan useful. However, since this book focuses on doing your very best with your current income, readers looking for discussions on long-term planning or investments might be disappointed. Don't misunderstand, long-term planning is vital for financial stability, but there are so many other great books on the topic we won't deal with those topics here. So if your concerns revolve around what will happen to your child's financial aid when you gift them a large portfolio of stocks, this book may have little to offer you. On the other hand, if your concerns revolve around how to make sure you can afford to pay the mortgage on an upside-down house so your child has a roof over his or her head, this book is written for you. If you have read other personal finance books, I hope you aren't disappointed to find this one a little bit different. Many, but not all, personal finance books offer what I call the bowl of popcorn approach to financial advice. They are full of little chewy nuggets of information which may or may not be useful on a daily basis. Very few of them offer a single coherent financial plan stretched throughout the book. There are notable exceptions, my aim is to be among them. For the author, the risk with aiming a little higher than popcorn advice is that I may lose my audience along the way. A book of popcorn is safe because just about everyone can find something useful in such a book. Everyone goes home a winner, and no one gets hurt. But nuggets of advice have very little power to comfort us or assist us if we are experiencing any serious financial problems. In order to help households truly suffering from the effects of the Great Recession, I will have to ask for something from my readers, and so I risk alienating many of them. If you are going to benefit from this book, you and I will have to agree that lasting change takes more than simply changing what you do. Lasting change also requires that you alter what you believe about money. To me, changing what you do without changing what you believe is very similar to dieting. The weight comes off, but unless you come to believe that healthy foods can satisfy your cravings better than junk food, the diet won't work. As soon as your diet ends, you will go right back to eating the way you ate before and end up putting the weight back on. The same holds true with financial changes. I can teach you how to avoid impulse purchases at the grocery store, but that won't help you if your belief system about money is broken. You will just impulse buy online instead. Remember, your values and choices have brought you to this current place of stress. Are you ready to try something different? In our house we have a saying, 2 + 2 always equals 4. If you believe and do the same things you did in the past, you will get the same results in the future. So if I am going to help you, I have to ask you to think critically about how you have dealt with money in the past and adopt new ways of thinking about money in the present. These new ways of thinking will form the foundation which will help you benefit from the nuts and bolts practical advice I will give you later in the book. If you come with an open mind, it will be worth the wait. The plan I offer isn't pie-in-the-sky idealism either. This is the battle-hardened financial plan which has guided my family for years. It is also the same plan I preach to other families as a real estate agent, financial advisor, and financial counselor. It is deeply personal for me, and I know it can change the way you deal with money and relieve your stress. To start, we need to peek out of our foxhole and take a look around. It is time for a short assessment of the financial landscape we find ourselves facing as a country. Our collective thinking and actions created it, and now we as individuals have to live with it. Along the way, I will tell you more of my story and introduce the concept which will organize our financial plan throughout the book. By now, almost all of us recognize, our country has contracted some kind of long-term economic illness. While reported unemployment may finally have begun to fall in recent months, it will take many years of consistent job growth to bring us to a place of full employment. Besides, actual unemployment is likely much higher than reported, because government unemployment numbers only count those actively looking for work. An unknown number of additional workers have given up. The Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics has estimated only 58% of working-age males are currently employed. Working-age male employment has been declining for decades, but the recent recession has pushed it off a cliff. If you are so lucky as to become unemployed, it takes an average of 40 weeks to find employment. Some argue, long-term unemployment numbers are as bad as or worse than during Great Depression. Yet, despite these dire realities, many politicians seem more committed to finger-wagging and ideological solutions than taking concrete steps to get out of the mess. Both consumer advocates and many media outlets have encouraged consumers to look back at the housing bubble and blame the banks, predatory lenders, and Wall Street for causing our current pain. After all, they say, if the banks hadn't invented ridiculously risky loan products, then none of this would have happened. They imagine rooms full of cigar-smoking executives sitting around deciding how best to take money from little old ladies. Motives aside, the pundits aren't wrong. The system of turning mortgages into investments promoted ever greater risk-taking by lenders who had little at stake when they were not the final investor. The huge profits banks earned through servicing mortgages led to a tremendous amount of faulty thinking. My personal favorite, many banks built into their lending policies and loans the assumption that housing prices would always go up. This was neither historically accurate nor a reasonable expectation. One only has to look back to the mid-1980s to find an American housing market with flat or even declining prices. But this thinking backed many of the more risky loan products offered by banks, such as adjustable rate mortgages and second position home equity lines of credit. Greed makes fools out of the best of us, even those who should know better. This doesn't even consider the outrageously risky stated income mortgages. These mortgages required little or no documentation for employment or income. The borrower literally stated how much they earned. Lenders only contemplated making such loans because they knew their financial institution wouldn't be left holding the mortgage on their books. Instead, they packaged these loans with other high-risk loans, claimed they were investment-grade mortgage-backed securities, and sold them to unsuspecting investors. However, other pundits emphasize the consumer's responsibility to make healthy financial choices. They argue banks only provided what the public wanted. No one forced anyone to sign a stated income mortgage. No one forced buyers to purchase more home than they could afford, and certainly no one forced homeowners to take their equity and spend it on a 2-week vacation in Hawaii. Consumer advocates counter that banks created an intentionally asymmetrical relationship with the consumer. Time and again, banks told their customers they could reasonably spend their home equity on consumer goods and services. How many banners can you remember seeing in the windows of banks saying things like, "Need a vacation. Home equity rates at 4%." Once again, consumer advocates present a compelling argument, because the relationship between banks and consumers was and is asymmetrical. Like all companies, banks heavily market the debt they sell. They attempt to associate themselves and their debt with all the good things we want in life. They obscure dangers and ludicrously exaggerate benefits, while failing to clearly explain the risks. Yet in this, they only do what companies large and small are expected to do in the United States. They, like all other for-profit companies, sell a product to the consumer to benefit their owners, the bank's stockholders. Despite my sympathies with the consumer advocate's position, I worry these arguments contain a dangerous kernel of untruth which could paralyze us if it dominated our beliefs. All of us who feel a righteous indignation toward the banks, Wall Street, and big corporations run the risk of making the consumer out to be a helpless victim, doomed to financial failure by an unfair system no one can control. This simply isn't the case. In any financial transaction there are two parties, the buyer and the seller. Standing outside the situation, I can say the relationship between them is asymmetrical. However, the seller only has more power because the buyer wants what the seller offers. If the buyer decides they do not want to purchase the seller's product, then the seller loses all their power and control. At the instant the buyer rejects the seller's advances, they stand looking at each other as equals once more. It may be a hard truth, but as consumers we must recognize we cannot change our financial situation until we own up to our beliefs and choices. What the banks and the advertisers did to get us to this place really doesn't matter. We must understand, we have given away much of our financial freedom through the decisions we have made. We wanted what they sold us, plain and simple. I have some good news. No matter how discouraged we get, we are free to change what we want at any moment in time. If we want to change our personal financial situation, we need to change what we value and, by extension, what we purchase. Change what we consume as a society and we might change corporations. Change what we consume and we might even change our political system. No matter what, change what we consume and we will take back our sense of control and self-respect. Defining the problem. It would be easy to pull a simple writer's trick at this point. I could tell you what I call an Eden story. An Eden story is a story about the idyllic time before the beginning of our troubles. The trick works well because it resonates so powerfully within most of us. Most human beings seem to long for a time before innocence was lost. Isn't this how many fiction stories begin? There is a short time of peace which sets the stage for the conflict. In this case, the story could start in the time before we came to be controlled by big bad personal debt. All I have to do is pick a significant decade, say the 1930s, and tell you how most people from that era felt being in debt was evil and how they worked hard to avoid all debt. Then comes the fall from grace, the moment we sinned as a people and our troubles began. In this case, the role could be played by the post-World War II housing boom led by the new FHA mortgages. I could talk about the terrible compromises of the so-called greatest generation, how it was their Diners Club card which introduced our culture to easy debt and made it prestigious. I could tell you this story, but beware. Like most Eden stories it simply isn't true. In particular, there just hasn't been a time in our culture or any other culture before debt. Oh, yes, views about debt have changed over time, and I of course would like to change your views about debt, but personal debt has a much longer, richer and more interesting history in our world than our problems in the present. Debt goes back as far as the written record. In fact, there are written records pertaining to debts which predate the invention of modern currency. In every culture, in every time, some human beings have found themselves unable to pay for the necessities of life, and because of this, they have borrowed money and goods to live. For the vast majority of history, when they could no longer pay back their debts, they paid with their labor, enslaving themselves or their children to their creditors. Be grateful you were born in the modern era. Yet, even if debt has always been part of human society and will be for the foreseeable future, attitudes about debt change over time. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see our current beliefs about personal debt are not sustainable. We cannot continue to indefinitely spend more than we bring in each month. If we continue to go deeper into debt, at some point we will not be able to make our payments, and it will have to stop. In most times and places people have used debt to pay for the necessities of life when they have no other means of doing so. However, many Americans use debt not only to pay for necessities but also to try to improve their lifestyle. Such an obviously paradoxical way of thinking ought to cause us to laugh out loud at the irony. In any time frame other than the immediate moment, consumer debt cannot improve your life. Consumer debt always makes the future worse than it could be because of the debt service payments and interest. Yet for many of us the irony is a little too bitter for laughter, while some of us don't perceive the irony at all. One goal of this book is to help teach you new ways of thinking about debt. To do that, we will look at the effects of debt on our quality of life in detail. To begin, start by asking yourself, in what circumstances do you believe it is acceptable to go into debt? Yes, this includes those credit cards you don't pay fully each month. Credit cards which are not 100% paid off at the end of the month are debt, period. Each of us needs to examine the reasons we believe it is acceptable to use a credit card. If we want to change our financial situation for the better, each of us needs to understand the values which drive the choices we make each day. For now, don't try to change your behavior, unless you want to, just observe your thinking and spending habits. Look at the times you use a credit card. What kind of items do you buy on credit? Are they necessities? Are they impulse buys? Just spend some time observing yourself. This isn't a right or wrong kind of quiz, so work hard to keep from judging your choices. Self-judgment acts as a trap which keeps many people from being able to change their ways. If you are going to adopt a new value system, you need to accept the one you have now and quit pretending someone else made all those financial decisions you regret. You might need to give yourself permission to be angry with yourself or cry. Don't worry about that, the rest of us are crying over our mistakes as well. You are not alone. Then, if you ever hope to change, you will need to forgive yourself and move on. Anger turned inward inhibits change like nothing else. Ironically, many Americans believe they are alone in their financial woes. Yet my experiences as a financial counselor have shown me time and again, we are not alone in our suffering. I have counseled all levels of wealth, from those who live exclusively on Social Security, to C-list celebrities and those who live in Beverly Hills. The amounts of income may be different, but the stories are strikingly similar. Let's not forget that poor financial choices are not limited to individuals. Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, AIG, General Motors, and Chevrolet didn't go under because they were financial geniuses. Governments are not immune either. The 2011 Eurozone crisis is simply a debt crisis on an international scale. The problem isn't yours alone, and it isn't just you who can't figure out a solution. Poor financial thinking is in the water. It is in the air that you and I breathe. It is part of our culture. So before you and I can find a new way to think, we will have to learn to recognize when our current culture gets in our way. Why fixing our country's financial problems won't be easy. To understand just how deep our cultural problems with debt run, you need to know a little more about our current economic situation. I finally began to grasp just how dire our financial situation was as a country in the winter of 2009, when I heard a presentation by a Washington State University economics professor. He showed, wages for all but the very wealthiest individuals in the United States had largely been flat since 1980, when adjusted for inflation. This means since 1980, for the average American, there has been no improvement in their financial well-being because any increase in wages was simply used up by rising prices for consumer goods. He pointed out our economy is approximately 66% to 70% driven by consumer spending. Then he simply asked a question: if consumers had no extra money to spend, how did our economy grow so nicely for 28 years? It is no coincidence that consumer debt ballooned over the same period, rising to just under $1 trillion, that is 1 trillion for those of you who didn't count the zeros. For nearly 30 years, at least part of our economic growth rested upon a growing personal debt bubble. The overheated housing market of 2000 to 2005 was only the last spasm of this disease. In 2007 and 2008 this 30-year-old credit bubble collapsed. How long it will take to repair our economy no one really knows, but it is fairly obvious to me, because of our debt load, the American consumer will not be able to drag this economy back out of its pit. That means it might take something on the order of a decade before our economy really finds its footing again. A similar credit bubble took place in the late 1980s in Japan. Do you remember when we feared that Japan was going to take over the United States? They were spending money buying major icons of America such as Rockefeller Plaza in New York. Our fear of Japanese corporations and their money allowed Michael Crichton to write a best-selling novel called Rising Sunday Japanese. Corporations appeared dangerous and unstoppable. Then in 1990 their credit bubble burst, their economy tanked, and very quickly we quit fearing the Japanese takeover of the United States. The thing is, their economy didn't really recover until the turn of the millennium, and even then it has never been the same. For now, the Japanese seem to have lost their taste for conspicuous consumption based on debt. As Americans who have just experienced the collapse of our credit bubble, this should sober us. As individuals, it should make us think about what financial contingency plans we have made to protect our homes and our children from an economic storm which isn't going away anytime soon. We may not know what the future of the American economy will look like, and we may not know when we will feel like we are out of the woods, but good decisions in the midst of this financial mess can make the difference between weathering the storm with a few bruises and finding ourselves deeply in over our heads, facing dire consequences for the ones we love. Americans used to take their basic needs for granted. We didn't worry about food or shelter. How much has changed in such a short time? Our deeply wounded economy no longer allows any of us to take our basic needs for granted. It is possible in this economy to work very hard, to be employed full-time, and still end up in a foreclosure, without adequate food, clothing, and transportation. I personally know this to be true. My own story. My career track record doesn't create the picture-perfect resume. I have had too many different careers over the last decade to make typical human resource managers comfortable. However, not all of my changes in job and career were by choice. In 2004, I discovered real estate, and for the next 4 years I was happy in that profession. I built a good business as a residential real estate agent, but during those years the pickings were easy. Even though I made a better income than I had previously, I still struggled to get by. Like many professions, at the beginning, real estate is either feast or famine. Along the way, I made my share of financial mistakes. Once when money was tight, I refinanced my home, used the equity to pay off some debt and a car, and in the process raised my monthly mortgage payment nearly $400 per month. To this day, I deeply regret that decision. Even when times were good, we didn't seem to be able to get ahead. We lived from irregular paycheck to irregular paycheck. In between, we used a credit card or two to fill in the gaps. When the next paycheck would come, we would dump any extra onto the credit cards and put none of it in savings. What do you think would happen the next time a deal didn't close, and we had another gap? Out came the credit card. In the winter of 2007, my parents invited my wife and me to take Dave Ramsey's 13-week Financial Peace University with them. What an eye-opener. There were so many aha moments throughout the course of the seminar. We began building an emergency fund and applying Ramsey's baby steps to our personal finances. Ramsey's course provided key missing pieces which deeply influenced my thinking about money and saved my family from financial disaster. However, even while taking his course, I felt something didn't quite make sense. Ramsey's conspicuous consumption was continuously on display, and his plan still made becoming rich the end goal of healthy personal finance. Reservations aside, Ramsey's classes helped, and none too soon. In the spring of 2007, the collapse of the real estate bubble began. By July, our finances dramatically tightened. Later that fall, there was a brief window during which I did pretty well by focusing on first-time buyers, but I could see what was happening. Ever since watching homes receive 30-plus offers in the summer of 2006, I had been worried about a bubble. As things ground to a halt in the fall of 2007, I figured the party was over. By early winter of 2008, the media had found their culprit. Do you remember those quaint arguments which said the majority of us were perfectly good borrowers, and it was just those evil subprime people who caused the problem? Denial is a deep river. By February, the handwriting was on the wall for many careers in real estate. In my area, there were nearly 1,800 real estate agents and only 300 sales a month. I figured, if there were two sides to every transaction, my family would eat about 1 out of every 3 months. For some reason that wasn't good enough for me. Late one night, I cried in my office as I decided to leave real estate. I really loved helping home buyers and homeowners. Oh, if only I could have seen a bit farther the future. I quickly looked around for a profession which had a similar feel, and within a month, I landed a job as a financial advisor with A.G. Edwards. My first day was St. Patrick's Day 2008. Oops. I don't care how hard you work, it isn't the best decision to start a career as a financial advisor when you are staring at the biggest bear market since 1929. After 2 corporate mergers, I ended up working for Wells Fargo and washed out in May of 2010. In January of 2011, I took a job with a nonprofit financial counseling agency in order to pay the mortgage. When that job ended in November, I finally gathered my thoughts and finished writing a book partially based on my experiences. In America, we love winners. We love to talk about the person who made good against long odds. Dave Ramsey is a classic example. Ramsey has made a name for himself as a personal finance guru, because he has been a self-made millionaire twice, with a trip through the desert of bankruptcy in the middle. I think most of us figure that if the person has been able to dig out of bankruptcy and put together $1 million, they probably know what they are talking about when it comes to personal finance. I think this is true, to a point. As I have already said, I personally benefited from Ramsey's thinking about debt. His class really saved me. I couldn't imagine what the last 4 years would have been like without it. But we also like Ramsey's story because Americans like to think we will all become rich someday. We all hope we are the next multi-millionaire, and by all means, if you can get there, go for it. Nothing I say in this book will stand in your way. In fact, it will help, and used well, wealth can truly help relieve the burdens of life. However, I want to let you in on a little secret. If we all became millionaires, then 100 million or even $1 billion would become the new standard of wealth. More importantly, milk would cost $300 a gallon. The scale of money would simply change, and it would still be the 1% versus the 99%. Trying to become wealthy isn't the answer, and worse, acting like we are wealthy when we are not can deeply damage our financial stability for years to come. Like Ramsey, I believe hard work is a necessary component to healthy finances, but the Ramsey story and other rags to riches tales have begun to ring hollow for me. I am growing more than a little tired of the fairy tale. After doing just what I was supposed to, where is my financial peace? What is the benefit of continuing to try when I haven't been able to get ahead? In my darkest moments, I wonder why I shouldn't get a credit card and take my kids to Disneyland like my neighbors. From the fairy tale winner's corner there isn't. I admit to making my share of mistakes. Haven't we all, even the winners? But enough is enough. In this economy, many of us are going to do our best and still find ourselves making hard financial choices. Financial peace for the hard-working is no longer guaranteed. Was it ever? Most of all, I deeply fear that I will fail as a provider for my children. My struggles have given me many gifts, one of which has been to make crystal clear to me that I love my 3 daughters and my wife tremendously. I would do anything to serve them. If I end up taking a below living wage job just to preserve my home, it will be primarily for their sake. Living this nightmare has made me feel like a failure and, frankly, makes me distrust the financial fairy tale even more. I don't need the winners piling on with their insistence that the outcome would have been different if only I had wanted it more. It doesn't help. Yet, when I feel sorry for myself in the dark corners of the night, I find hope in this. I, unlike my neighbors, know what a tremendous difference it can make to keep your financial priorities straight, even when you don't have any money. By the grace of God, since 2007 we've managed to pay off all our consumer debt. Despite consistently declining income, only one pesky student loan and my home mortgage remain. To tell the truth, even losing my home might not be so bad for my balance sheet. It isn't what I want, but if it happened, it wouldn't be the end of the world, and it would take a huge debt burden off my shoulders. Frankly, whether it goes or stays, I win. But I will win because I know how to win, and because I consistently choose to do the things it takes to win. Those choices make the difference between a frustrating but tolerable situation and an intolerable nightmare. If you define financial success as having $1 million in the bank, I am not the writer for you. Go read The Rich Dad, Poor Dad guy. He will sell you the secret for becoming the next millionaire. Good luck with that. But if you define financial success as doing the best with what you have, then I have something to offer. It has been a rough ride in the last few years, but with experience comes wisdom. Don't think this book relies on just my own wisdom either. As a real estate agent, financial advisor, and financial counselor, I've heard the stories of hundreds of different households. I counseled households from across the whole economic spectrum, and each household added its unique story to my financial thinking. Along the way, I learned that the poor can outshine the wealthy when it comes to financial wisdom. Theirs is the wisdom of scarcity. I have watched people from all income levels give up and fall into the cynicism of debt-based living. I've counseled single mothers who were one step away from losing the home which provided the last shreds of stability for their children. I grieved with them as they faced foreclosure and possible homelessness. If I have learned one thing from their stories, it is the power of choice. Keep choosing. Don't take the easy path. It makes a difference. Don't give in to the pressure. Remember the 1930s came to an end. This will end as well, and we will all be better for it. Playing the hand you were dealt. No one asks to be born into a generation which is not likely to do as well as their parents. However, for those of us under 40 there is a distinct possibility this will be our fate. I won't suggest we shouldn't be mad at the situation. On the contrary, most of us don't understand how badly our parents screwed things up. For us, it isn't right that many of us are facing an uncertain future because our parents wouldn't keep their hands out of the consumer cookie jar, even though they couldn't pay for it. But, blame rarely creates any useful change, and since coming of age, my generation hasn't exactly avoided the excesses of our elders. Our own self-destructive financial choices make it unwise for us to throw stones. In reality, it doesn't matter how we got to this point. The question is no longer how we avoid or get out of the trap laid for us by the rampant consumer debt of the last 30 years, but rather what we as individual households are going to do now that we are in this situation. Contrary to popular belief, there is a lot which can be done. We cannot change the hand we have been dealt, but we can play it to the best of our ability, which can make a tremendous difference in where we end up on the other side of this mess. Mission, strategy, and tactics. In any military action there are three different components. First, there is the mission set out by the commander-in-chief. Then, the mission is delivered to the military which has the task of carrying it out. Traditionally, the military breaks its thinking into two components as it tries to accomplish a mission set by the president. The first of these would be the strategies the military chooses to complete the president's mission. For instance, in World War II the Allied leaders set the mission of bringing about the unconditional surrender of Japan and Germany. The Allies pursued a variety of strategies to accomplish this mission. Perhaps the most obvious strategy was the systematic liberation of almost all the territory the Axis powers had recently occupied. The third component of traditional military planning are the numerous real-world activities which, when organized by the strategies into a coherent plan, accomplish the mission set by the President. These day-to-day activities are called tactics. For instance, the invasion of Normandy, D-Day, was a tactic used to accomplish the strategy of defeating Hitler's armies, which helped accomplish the commander-in-chief's mission to force the surrender of Germany. Military planners fall into a classic mistake when they replace clear strategic thinking with tactics. Many military historians accuse the United States of making this mistake during its participation in the Vietnam conflict. You can watch an example of this mistake in the film When We Were Soldiers. The movie portrays one of the first major American battles of the Vietnam War, the Battle of Ia Dong. American troops won a hard-fought victory against a much larger Vietnamese force. However, the president hampered the ability of American military planners to make victories like La Dong stick, because while the president had set a clear mission defeating the army of North Vietnam, he added all sorts of unclear and contradictory conditions, such as fighting the Vietnam conflict on the cheap and with only a few troops on the ground. The North Vietnamese army also hampered American military planning, because they simply did not attempt to hold any territory. Rather, if the Americans showed up, they moved on and simply came back after the Americans left. Faced with these difficulties, American military planners struggled to find strategies which allowed them to accomplish the president's mission. Since a clear and politically feasible strategy could not be found, planners tended to confuse tactics for strategies. In When We Were Soldiers, placing infantry on helicopters became more than a tactic to deal with a highly mobile enemy. Instead, military thinkers exalted the helicopter to a strategy which could win the war and accomplish the president's goals. While tactics such as helicopter-based infantry won many short-term victories during Vietnam, these victories were never sustained and often quickly reversed, because American military planners lacked a credible strategic roadmap which allowed the tactics to work together toward a mission. Many of us make the same kind of mistakes with our personal finances which our government did during the Vietnam conflict. We win many small victories, and even some major battles, but then wonder why it still feels like we are spinning our wheels. For instance, for a time we may manage to keep shuffling our credit card debt from one low-interest introductory offer to another. We may always pay all our bills on time and have a nearly perfect credit score. Yet we still feel we are falling further and further behind. Often, we have no problem finding tactics to win battles on a daily basis. Instead, we lack a clear and reasonable financial mission and strategic plans to guide our daily financial choices toward that mission. In order to make sense of our financial situation, we need to take a step back from the day-to-day battles, look at where we are trying to go and what strategies we are using to try to accomplish these goals. I have found this military planning model to provide a useful way to think about personal finance, and we will use it as a guide throughout this book. To begin, we must organize our frenetic activity. We must give ourselves a mission. We must understand what it is we want our hard work to bring us. It is time to look your financial mission. Your financial mission. At a time like this, I think one can easily forget that we live in an incredible country. America is still rightly called the land of opportunity. Each day, immigrants from around the world still arrive on our shores, because in the United States they have the opportunity to make a better life for themselves and their children. Even in a depressed economy, our country still provides its inhabitants with an ability to take care of daily needs which is beyond the wildest dreams of 99% of the human beings who have lived on this planet. We really shouldn't forget that. America is a great place to be born and a great place to live. Sometimes in the middle of all the frustrations of daily living, we just need to sit back, take a deep breath and be thankful for what we have, and we have a lot. Despite our current economy, the American dream still seems very much alive for our new immigrants. Yet since our earliest days as a country there seems to have been a split in the meaning of the American dream. Just what did immigrants come to find on our shores? On the one hand, it seems to have embodied an idea expressed in the Norman Rockwell painting Freedom from Want. In this famous painting we see a grandmother and grandfather bringing a turkey to a table surrounded by friends and family. All are smiling, including Rockwell himself, who looks out of the painting at the viewer from the bottom right-hand corner. Rockwell's title uses the word want in the old-fashioned sense of the word, freedom from deprivation. All the basic needs of those in the painting have been met, they have no want. This painting was part of a series of 4 paintings which Rockwell painted to sell war bonds during World War II. The series was titled Ours to Fight For. If a modern reader can fault the painting for anything, it would be its lack of diversity. This is clearly a white, middle-class dream. That said, Rockwell captures well the dreams which have driven people of every ethnicity to our shores. In America we have a better opportunity to be free from want than in just about any other place in the world, and individuals and families have sought that dream for hundreds of years. Yet, from the earliest days of our nation, this modest American dream has always competed with a more grandiose version. This grand American dream might be stated as freedom to have everything I want. One could easily fall into the trap of believing such thinking is only a post-World War II problem, but such is not the case. This definition can be seen in the land rushes and gold rushes of the 19th century as well as in the investment and get-rich-quick schemes of the 20th. Pieces of it run through most contemporary books on personal finance, including Dave Ramsey's work, which emphasizes wealth creation as the end goal of all healthy personal financial thinking. Perhaps my very favorite expression of this grand American dream comes from the song Big Rock Candy Mountain, by Harry McClintock, which lays out a hobo's version. If something has changed in the last 70 years, it has been that so many Americans believed this grand dream could be reached. After World War II, our unprecedented wealth strongly tipped the balance in favor of the grand vision. For many in our culture, unprecedented prosperity allowed them to take finding adequate food, clothing, shelter, and transportation for granted. Instead, most Americans organized their lives around the pursuit of status, acceptance, and personal success. This does not in any way imply that all Americans shared equally in our prosperity. During that time many Americans, particularly those from racial and ethnic minorities, continued to struggle to meet their basic needs. However, during the post-war era, the voices of these groups did not dominate our culture. Unfortunately, the dominance of the grand dream has made the last 4 years all the more difficult for those Americans who unexpectedly find themselves struggling to pay for basic necessities. Many formerly middle-class households have been unprepared to grapple with an economy that no longer guarantees to meet the basic needs of all hard-working adults. The move backwards has come as quite a shock. Consider this chapter a chance to reshape your priorities. We'll begin by considering how our status-driven culture has reshaped our goals and thinking during the last 70 years. Along the way, we will look at a real-world example of how taking basic needs for granted leads to poor financial thinking, and how it works against even high-income earners in our culture. Finally, we will consider what financial goals are reasonable in light of our current economy. Wants versus needs, an opportunity for business. When a person is concerned about their survival, they hold tightly to their resources, because tomorrow they might need them. It takes a lot for them to be convinced they have enough resources to spend them on a luxury item. Extra resources are much more likely to be saved for a rainy day. But what happens to our financial thinking if our concern about physical survival is taken away? For an individual who is no longer concerned about their basic needs, a whole host of nebulous desires are now free to compete for that person's time and attention. Goods and services related to human needs can become undervalued, while those goods and services which provide perceived status, self-expression, and prestige dominate a person's choices and financial thinking. In this system, wants have replaced needs as the primary concern in most financial planning. However, these new desires are much more matters of taste and opinion. The post-war dominance of taste and opinion in our culture's financial thinking created a whole host of new business opportunities. Consumption, luxury items, and goods and services which provided perceived status took on a new importance. In fact, as we saw in the last chapter, they became the driving force behind our economy. Today consumer spending accounts for nearly 70% of our economic growth. Because they depend on our continued spending on luxury items, many American businesses, not to mention currently elected politicians, have a vested interest in making sure we do not begin to prioritize our basic necessities over continued consumer spending. After all, to take the necessities of life seriously again will come at a cost for all of us. For a time, such behavior will make our economic problems worse because Americans will no longer spend money on status items. This will slow consumer spending, and this will lead to slower growth in our economy. This drop in consumer spending then feeds back on itself, causing more layoffs and worsening our economic situation. Thus many businesses and politicians would rather we didn't change our behavior, because it will make life more difficult for them. However, a great many of us are buried under debt and lacking in savings. We really don't have much of a choice but to try to pay off our debt. The alternative is to continue forward down a very unproductive path of overconsumption and simply put off the day of reckoning for another few years. That may serve the interests of our currently elected officials and business leaders, but it is certainly not in your best interests, not until you have taken care of some other priorities first. Just keep that in mind the next time someone in business or government says that the answer to our problems is for the American consumer to start spending again. If you are struggling with basic necessities and have little or no savings, these leaders don't have your best interests at heart. Since the end of the war, our country has created whole industries dedicated to persuading us to continue spending money on luxury items. The invention of the television just at the beginning of this wealth boom profoundly impacted the process by which advertisers accomplished their goals. More recently, the internet and social networking have opened avenues for marketing goods and services which couldn't have been imagined in the wildest dreams of the madmen of the 1960s. Today, advertisers invest billions of dollars each year to discover what makes us choose to place our money with product X rather than product Y. We could digress and talk about the thousands of different tactics advertisers use to convince us to purchase luxury products, but that won't help if we don't have our own priorities straight. Every consumer should learn defense strategies such as looking at the bottom shelf in a grocery store and avoiding eye-level products. Besides, other personal finance writers have written great books on marketing tactics. For now, just keep in mind sellers need to make us want their products before their tactics will work. This is why in TV land beer always gets you the sexy girl and why cotton fabric always appears at the most sentimental moments in our lives. Marketers work very hard to associate their products with the good stuff life offers. Then they leave it up to us to make the mistake of believing their product will provide the good life we want. The best defense against advertising is to make your own decisions about what you value and to maintain a skeptical attitude about the associations which advertisers try to make with their products. Since when is cotton more homey, sentimental, and comforting than silk? Only since advertisers told us so. And since when does the consumption of beer lead to catching the sexy girl? If you're the one drinking, it may lead to sex, but not usually with the sexy girl, unless she's more drunk than you are. If you know what you want out of life and you don't let advertisers trick you into believing their product will provide it, then advertisers have little control over what you purchase. Before we turn to look at a set of financial priorities which trump both wants and status, I have one more thing to say regarding the relationship between consumers and American business. Consumers must remember every for-profit company in the United States has exactly the same goal: to make money for its owners. This includes the mom-and-pop restaurant down the street and the megabank with a branch in your local grocery store. Where do they get all that money for their owners? From you. For these businesses, taking money from you and putting it in their pocket isn't a game, it's a matter of life and death. If they cannot extract enough money out of your pocket, they will go out of business. Worse still, publicly traded corporations have the expressed goal of trying to maximize their profits for their stockholders. By necessity, this implies trying to take as much money out of your pocket as they possibly can. For many companies, especially national corporations, if they have to trick you through deceptive marketing or hidden fees, they won't hesitate to do so. Every time a for-profit company interacts with you, their need for profit is their top priority. How could it be otherwise? Their survival depends upon it. They may sincerely believe customer satisfaction and quality products are important, but only as long as they help keep the company profitable. I am not trying to keep you from shopping at your local supermarket or car dealer. I want you to patronize local businesses in your community. I am trying to remind you no seller cares about your financial well-being as much as you do. They care most about their own existence, and their continued existence depends upon taking money away from you. For business, every interaction with you is a deadly serious struggle for your money, all dressed up with a friendly smile and a thank you. How seriously do you take it? Financial freedom versus financial stability. Until recently, we have been living in a culture dominated by a concern for luxury, status, and wants rather than basic necessities. However, for the majority of Americans, the pursuit of luxury has been a bit of a ruse for the past 30 years. Remember, since 1980 the wages of most workers in the United States have been flat or even slightly in decline when you consider inflation. Our raises were simply eaten up by the growing cost of milk, gasoline, and car payments. Any extra income we had available to improve our lifestyle didn't come because of increased earning power. Rather, Americans worked harder. We worked more hours. The number of families in which both spouses worked outside the home continued to grow. When all of these were not enough, we borrowed money to make sure we could continue to buy our status and sense of well-being. The generations born after the Second World War grew up believing they had a right to a better lifestyle than their parents, and when the economy didn't provide it, they borrowed to get it. Our current economic and personal finance troubles are simply the inevitable hangover. It is time we re-adopt a more modest vision of what our wealth can provide for us. While our land of opportunity is not capable of providing us with every consumer good and service we desire, it is still capable of providing us with unparalleled financial stability and freedom from real want. The pursuit of financial stability needs to replace the pursuit of financial freedom in our basic beliefs about what money can provide. But what practical difference in our day-to-day living does it make if we pursue financial stability instead of wealth? So far, all of this has been a really great thinking exercise, but that is only one small step toward changing our daily lives and relieving the knots in our stomachs. Perhaps, an example provides the best way to see what a difference the pursuit of financial stability can make in our thinking. Dentist versus receptionist. So what does it mean to be wealthy? Who is actually wealthy in the United States? Most of us believe wealth means having access to all the consumer goods and services we desire. Wealthy people are the people who have the most stuff. While that may be true, most people don't realize that access to stuff will not protect them from financial stress when difficult times arrive. Wealth is not equal to financial stability. To demonstrate my point, I want to give you an example I created for a seminar I taught at a low-income apartment complex. The salary numbers for the dentist are from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It also comes from my experiences as a financial counselor. In my practice, both of these fictional characters were very typical. We begin in the year 2005. The 30-year credit boom is still on, and no one knows it is rapidly approaching its end. The housing market is red hot, and the economy is still moving at a good clip, held up by our housing bubble. Let me introduce you to our two consumers. Meet Dr. Byte. Dr. Byte is a recently graduated dentist. By all our standards, he has done quite well for himself. 3 years ago he finished dental residency and was really quite lucky. Dr. Byte completed his residency with a local dentist who took a liking to him. This older dentist was looking to retire and hand his practice over to a younger dentist. Bill Byte was the perfect fit. Now, in 2005, he owns his own dental practice which employs 5 other people. He and his wife recently sold their first home in a not-so-nice neighborhood in Seattle proper. In the smoking hot housing market they did very well. They had 10 offers in just over 24 hours, and the home sold for well above the asking price. This profit, plus Bill's income, allowed them to purchase a new home out of town with a beautiful view of both Puget Sound and the distant Olympic Mountains. Not only does their 3,600 square foot home have a wet bar and small rec room, but it also has its own media room complete with leather theater seating, and a sound system which can make your fillings vibrate. Bill Byte likes nothing more than to invite his buddies over on the weekends to watch the local Seahawks and Huskies. Each morning Betsy, who is a stay-at-home mom, drives their luxury SUV to a local private school to drop off their 2 children. By any usual standard of American success, Bill is living the dream. Introducing Samantha Smile. Sam works at the front desk in Dr. Byte's office. Her life has not turned out as she planned. 5 years ago, right in the middle of her American dream, she was unexpectedly divorced by her creep of an ex-husband, who suddenly found one of his business colleagues more attractive. Her first year after divorce was incredibly difficult, but since then Sam has managed to find her footing. 2 years ago she started taking classes at a local community college. She has been able to get a couple of grants and taken a small amount of debt, but she mostly paid cash for her education. She plans to earn her associate's degree as well as a degree as a dental technician. She hopes that when she is finished, Dr. Byte will have a job for her. Since she needs to work full-time to pay for her schooling, she has only been able to take 1 or 2 classes at a time. She and her 2 children live in a decent apartment which she recently rented not far from Dr. Byte's office. Her children are coping as well as can be expected. Her ex sometimes pays his child support, but the new girlfriend didn't work out so well, and since they split up he has been struggling to hold down a job. Sam suspects guilt is part of his problem, but she has never looked back. One and done is her motto. However, she cannot count his court-ordered child support in her budget. Anything she can get for the kids with that money counts as an extra. Most often, she puts it aside for a rainy day. Now that we have met our characters, it is time to do something we Americans almost never get to do, much to our detriment. Let's take a look under the hood, shall we? What does their financial situation really look like? On the next couple of pages you will find side-by-side comparisons of each of their monthly income and expenses. Monthly income and expenses 2005. Income. Annual income. Dr. Byte. Sam Smile. $161,000 $31,000. Monthly gross income. Retirement. Health insurance. Pre-tax income. Federal tax withholding. Social Security. Medicare. $13,416.67 $2,583.33-$1,300.00-$200.00 $0 $0 $11,666.67 $2,383.33-$1,797.92 $0.00-$490.00 $169.17 Total monthly take-home pay $9,209.58 $2,237.33. Expenses. First mortgage or rent. Second mortgage. Groceries etc. car insurance, gasoline, electricity, natural gas, water/sewer, garbage, cable TV/internet, cell phones. Dr. Bite Sam Smile. $2,800 $850. $600 $0. $800 $500. $180 $65. $250 $110. $120 $85. $120 $0. $65. $0. $65. $0. $150 $45. $80. $80. Student loan/college tuition $967. $100 minimum credit card payments $432. $0 car payment $1. $415. $0. Car payment $2. Private school payments $512. $0. $1,100. $0. Entertainment and eating out $300. $50 pocket money $150. $50. Emergency savings. Savings for a new car. Vacation fund. Take home pay. Total expenses. Total leftover. $0. $0. $100. $200. $100. $0. $9,209.58. $2,237.33. $9,206. $2,235. $3.58. $2.33. If having all the material comforts you want is the definition of the American dream, then Dr. Bite has everything. He drives a very nice car and so does his wife. He has an amazing home, and he has enough money to eat out and entertain his family. He even puts $100 away per month for an annual trip to Hawaii, the rest of which is financed by credit cards which he has no trouble paying. Most of us would look at Dr. Bite and say he is well off, perhaps not wealthy, but definitely upper middle class. We would think he has arrived. On the other hand, Sam has just moved into the neighborhood which Dr. Bite left, and she is renting her apartment. She has little money left over each month and is able to take her small family out to eat only once a month and rarely to the movies. According to our current notions of success, she is just struggling to make it by. Most of us would say that she is not as well off as Dr. Bite. She might even be called poor by some ridiculous standards. But what happens when you put each of these situations under stress? How do they play out? Let's jump forward 5 years and see how Dr. Bite and Sam are doing in 2010. Dr. Bite in 2010. Things went along just fine for Dr. Bite until 2008, and then the last 2 years have been difficult. His collections have been steadily declining since the beginning of the recession. Right now he is down about 25% from his peak in 2007. Recently, he made the mistake of looking through the records from the last 30 years of the practice he owns and found out there hadn't been a month as bad as last month since 1987. As the layoffs have mounted in the last 2 years, it feels like all his clients have gone away. It feels like every other time the front desk calls to verify a 6-month cleaning they hear the same story. I lost my dental insurance and can't afford it right now. He has had to make some changes at work. He has taken a pay cut in order to keep his business going, so his pay is down 30%. Also, this year he finally decided he could no longer absorb the increasing cost of healthcare for his staff. Dr. Bite cares about his staff, and the meeting where he announced the changes ranks as one of the top 10 worst moments of his life. But there wasn't a choice, he just couldn't afford to continue to pay more. Since business is down, there is absolutely no more overtime, and he has asked a couple of his employees to cut back their hours to 35 hours per week. If something doesn't change, he will have to lay someone off. Every time he thinks about it, he feels sick. Things aren't going so well at home either. It just feels like he and Betsy can't get ahead. They are still making their credit card payments, but just barely. There have been times where they have been late enough that they have had a call or two from the credit card companies. Not that trying to make their payments has really mattered. Their credit card companies have still raised their rates to well over 20%, and they are unwilling to reduce them. Now it feels like no matter what they do, they cannot make any headway at all. So far, they have made every mortgage payment, but it has been a close thing as well, and who knows what next year will bring. Secretly, he has considered selling their home, but when he talked to one of his Rotary buddies about it, the real estate agent didn't have encouraging words. He estimated that his home, which he purchased at $725,000, is only worth around $600,000. Worse yet, Bill found out that in Washington state, second mortgages become personal debt if they aren't paid off in the sale. Even if he sold his home, he would likely need to follow up with a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, or he would end up dragging around $52,000 in debt from a home that he no longer owns. It really doesn't feel like much of an option to sell, but it is slowly dawning on Dr. Byte that he may have no choice. Thank goodness one of the cars has been paid off. That helped the budget significantly, but Betsy keeps pressuring him to get a new one. She says she doesn't feel safe in a 6-year-old vehicle. She kept warning him her car was going to break down, and sure enough it did. Thank goodness it happened at home, and the fix was relatively cheap, but now Betsy won't let go of the idea that her car is unreliable. Now she keeps telling him she is going to break down on the freeway one day, and she and the children will be left stranded. The image of his kids stuck in a car on I-405 keeps rattling around in his head, and that has kept him up at night. Sam Smile in 2010. The last couple of years have not been easy for Sam Smile either. Prices for everything keep going up, but she hasn't seen a raise since 2005. That said, she seems to be weathering the Great Recession better than some. Her boss, Dr. Byte, has been having an especially hard time. He has always run his business like a family. When he told his staff they were going to have to pay for part of their health care this year, he had tears in his eyes. The thing is, after her ex Greg left, Sam has never taken her financial situation for granted again. She has always made sure there is something extra each month. Sam just rolled with the change in expenses. Eating out has all but gone away, and going to the movies is a thing of the past. So is the daily latte habit. Instead, Sam and the dental assistants went in together and bought an espresso maker for the office. They make their own lattes now. One of the assistants used to be a barista, so they don't come out half bad. Those changes alone made a huge difference and were no-brainers for Sam. A layoff doesn't seem as far-fetched to Sam as it did even a few months ago. Dr. Byte asked 2 of the younger members of his staff to cut their hours. If things don't turn around soon at the practice, there will have to be more cuts. There has been talk among the other assistants they could even end up job sharing, that is, working part-time and taking unemployment part-time. That really got Sam thinking about whether or not she could handle a layoff. Knowing she has savings in the bank has allowed her to sleep at night, but if she lost her job, she realized she would probably have to get a roommate. Frankly, once she considered the idea, she decided she might just pursue it to keep up her savings. She couldn't count the number of times in the last few years her emergency fund has really saved her. From paying for stitches, to the month in which she was so tired she forgot to include the electric bill in the budget, savings has kept her afloat. Her only other option might be to quit school, but she only has 2 semesters left. That is probably the last thing she would consider. With her emergency fund she would have the cash to pay for those classes outright, but if she lost her job she would need that cash to pay for basic necessities like food. So far, Sam has avoided most student loans, but considering how close she is to finishing, she might consider dropping her tuition payment and borrowing for the rest. It wouldn't be that much debt, and since she does payroll in the office, she knows just how much better money a new dental assistant makes than she does. She can't say she is happy about her current financial situation, but she really is better off than some. In the office the other day she overheard a tense conversation between one of the other assistants and her husband. They are so upside down in credit card debt, they are going to have to look seriously at bankruptcy or drop their health coverage. Sam is just grateful she paid off all her credit card debt with some of the money she received in the divorce. She doesn't think she could sleep at night if she also had credit card debt to think about. By the looks of the dark circles under her co-worker's eyes, it doesn't look like she sleeps well either when she has financial problems. Monthly income and expenses 2010. Income. Annual income. Dr. Bite. Sam Smile. $112,700 $31,000. Monthly gross income. Retirement. Health insurance. Pre-tax income. Federal tax withholding. Social Security. Medicare. $9,391 $2,583.33-$930.00 $650.00 $0.00-$380.00 $7,811 $2,203.33-$834.00 $328.06 $113.26 $0.00-$108.50 $37.46 Total monthly take-home pay $6,535.68 $2,057.37 Expenses. First mortgage or rent. Second mortgage. Groceries etc. Car insurance. Gasoline. Electricity. Natural gas. Water/sewer. Garbage. Cable TV/internet. Cell phones. Dr. Bite Sam Smile. $2,800 $850 $600 $0 $1,000 $650 $220 $85 $450 $120 $120 $85 $85 $220 $150 $200 $85 $0 $0 $0 $0 $30 Student loan/college tuition $967 $100 minimum credit card payments $612 $0 car payment $425 car payment 2 private school payments $0 $0 $0 $1,500 $0 Entertainment and eating out $300 $0.00 pocket money $250 Emergency savings Savings for a new car Vacation fund Take home pay $0 $0 $100 $0.00 $50 $0.00 $0 $6,535.68, $2,057.37. Total expenses. Total leftover. $10,004 $2,050.00 $3,468.327.37. If Dr. Byte came into my financial counseling office, I have to say my news for him would not be positive. He does have financial options which could make his situation better, but I doubt he would accept any of them, because every one of them would dramatically change his lifestyle. Dr. Byte is living his life trying to satisfy all his material wants. The high amount of self-worth and value he receives from material goods will not make it easy for him to recognize he can no longer afford his current lifestyle. He certainly cannot afford to purchase a new car for his wife. More importantly, unless he finds a way to reduce his monthly expenses, he is likely to end up in bankruptcy in the very near future. There are many options available to Dr. Byte, but in our culture of financial freedom and having everything you want, he is in a much deeper financial bind than Sam. Think about that for a minute. Dr. Byte started out making 5 times as much as Sam. Even after taking a significant reduction in income, he still makes 4 times her income. Yet, it is the supposedly well-off person who faces bankruptcy. Have you ever wondered how billionaires can end up going bankrupt? How is it so many sports superstars make millions and millions while playing sports and then go bankrupt in only a few years? This is how they do it. They take their eye off the ball, take their basic needs for granted, and end up with no way out when the inevitable financial stress comes. As much as we assure ourselves we would never behave that way if we ever made it, many of us are just like Dr. Byte. Every time you stand in line for the newest Apple product without putting money aside for emergencies, you are pursuing the wrong American dream. Every time you use credit to pay for something, knowing full well that you will pay interest on it, you are risking your financial future and condemning yourself to a lifestyle that is worse than what your paycheck could provide. As a nation, we can no longer afford to let the pursuit of financial freedom get in the way of the pursuit of financial stability. Our pursuit of the wrong financial goals takes away our options and leaves us vulnerable to downturns like our current one, and it hurts our families. So what are those obstacles which keep us from taking care of our financial stability first? What holds us back from pursuing financial stability, and what can we do about it, other than paying a therapist for the next 3 years? These will be our topics in the next chapter. How you spend your money reflects your true values. Stop and think about that for half a second. I mean it more literally than it may sound at first. It isn't a metaphor. It is more literal than a metaphor. Unless you are a trust fund baby, the money you have to spend on a monthly basis represents your hard work. Imagine for a moment that you are holding all the money you earned last month in cash. Unless you have savings, that cash is all your potential buying power for the month. Credit allows you to spend next month's work early. However, using credit now means you will have less money to spend next month, because next month, some of your income will have to go to pay off the extra money you spent this month. When you use debt, you trap yourself in a cycle of ever-diminishing freedom. So as you hold your money in your hand, imagine in front of you all the things that money could buy for you. Even if your paycheck is small, it is a world of almost infinite possibility. The problem is your money is not infinite. Your money has infinite potential as long as it is in your hand, but that potential is immediately lost when you actually buy something. The potential has been used up. Now you have less money in your hand and you have the thing you purchased. The fact that our money runs out forces us to make choices about where we spend our money. When we make those choices, we are explicitly demonstrating that we value the things we chose to purchase over all the other goods and services we chose to avoid. How we spend our money reflects our true values at that moment in time. No one forces you to spend your money on any particular item. Your money doesn't tell you where it needs to be spent, your values do. If you value food, you will spend some of your money on food. If you value what your spouse says and spend your money in the way they want it spent, you are choosing to invest in their respect and acceptance. When you purchase Guitar Hero 46 with the new Kiss Black and White drum kit, leaving yourself with little money to pay for food and only a partial rent payment, you are showing that you value a video game more than you value food and shelter. When you purchase Guitar Hero 46 on credit, because you do not have enough money to purchase it for cash, you demonstrate that you value a video game more than next month's food and rent. Why we don't look at our bills, emotions and values in conflict. Many of us find ourselves emotionally conflicted, because the goods and services we actually buy don't match up with what we wish we valued, or what we say we value. Worse yet, values change, sometimes very quickly. What we valued in the moment may not be what we wish we had valued later. When we see this kind of behavior in ourselves, it creates all sorts of emotional conflicts and internal stress. Now, morality and ethics are all mixed up with our money. We feel badly, because we are embarrassed that we got a new iPhone while our daughter was told she couldn't play soccer this fall because we couldn't afford it, honey. Now, on top of the actual stress of managing all those bills, we add a heaping helping of shame and guilt. Is it any wonder that many of us have developed a large and unhealthy toolkit of avoidance behaviors and coping mechanisms? Some of us even take out our credit cards and spend money to assuage our guilt for overspending. Yikes! How's that working for you? Says the Dr. Phil cherub on our shoulder. There really isn't any easy way around it. For most of us, finding a way forward financially will mean facing the bad feelings and pain we have been putting off. The day of reckoning, which our country has experienced nationally, we also must each experience personally. Many of us are already in the middle of that day. Most of us recognize we can no longer ignore the pain. The question is what we do about it. Learning to accept yourself. Whenever I sit down to work with a family or an individual on their financial situation, I start by telling them there are no right or wrong answers to any of my questions. I want them to understand that they are not going to be scolded for their choices. Some financial counselors love to spend their time trying to make the finances of their clients look just like their own. While it may make the counselor feel superior to the client, it probably won't help the client. Of course, I point areas where I think my clients could make changes which would help them, but in the end, it is their values which will determine which changes they will make. But wait a second. I can hear you say, didn't you just spend the last 2.5 chapters telling us we shouldn't value status items over our basic necessities? Isn't that telling us what to value? You are perfectly correct. Throughout this book, I make the assumption that you value items like food, clothing and shelter more than you value luxury items like new video games, a new iPhone or a vacation to Hawaii. We all make mistakes, and sometimes we value status items more than necessities. Hopefully, these are not the majority of our moments, and hopefully we seek to change and improve so these mistakes don't threaten our financial stability. However, I could be wrong, at least some of the time. There have been clients who have surprised me. I once met a recently divorced woman with no children who owned a horse. As we examined her budget, it became very clear she was in danger of losing her home. She needed to make a decision between her home and her horse. Even if she did give up her home, it would still be difficult for her to find adequate shelter without giving up her horse. After I explained the situation, without even blinking an eye, she looked at me and said, "I will keep the horse." That isn't the answer I would give, but I am not a horse person, and who am I to tell her she is making the wrong decision? If she is willing to be homeless to keep her horse, am I to tell her otherwise? I hope the back seat of her car is a comfortable place to sleep. My job as a financial counselor was not to try to convince her to give up her horse. Rather, my job was only to show her the choice she must make between a decent place to live and her horse. Her values are her own choice. Often, I find a large amount of our inner conflict about finances comes from our unwillingness to really look at what we truly value, and stand by it with integrity. We allow perception, the opinions of others or perhaps religion to tell us what we should value, rather than owning up to what we truly value. Many of us have had our brains so addled by the continuous bombardment of advertisers that we don't even know what we value. An early step in taking control of our financial situation must be a kind of radical honesty and acceptance when it comes to our actual values. Only this kind of honesty and acceptance will allow us to see clearly the changes we need to make in our value system. Sometimes values and finances become a bit like a Chinese finger puzzle. Our desired values say one thing, and our financial choices say another. We find ourselves pulling as hard as we can to get out of the trap. We keep making purchases which another piece of us wishes we didn't make. It doesn't work, and we usually serve up lots of shame and guilt along the way. For myself, I find I need to respect my values as they are. This doesn't mean I give up on my desire to change them. On the contrary, I find that acceptance is the first step toward change. When I reserve judgment on my actions, I am often much more able to understand what motivates my behavior, and this lets me move forward. When we refrain from judgment, it is like we have stopped our efforts to pull against the Chinese finger trap. Once we stop, we can relax and find a way out of our dilemma. At times, I can be frustrated with the outcome of a choice I made and tempted to be angry with myself. I find that I am my own harshest critic. However, when I take a few minutes, reserve judgment, and instead just think through why I made the choices I made, no matter how painful the reason, I sometimes find there is more merit in my decisions than I give myself credit for. No matter what the outcome, by putting off my self-criticism and paying attention to my choices, I find myself in a much better position to understand my values and change them in the future. Once we have a true handle on what we really value, those areas where our actual financial values don't match up with our desired financial values will quickly become evident. It may also become quite clear that our financial values differ from those around us, perhaps with those we care about most, such as our spouses and family. That is the topic for the next section of our chapter. Money in relationships. There are as many different ways to manage money in relationships as there are different kinds of relationships. That is one of the things I enjoy most about being able to sit down with families and look over their finances. Each relationship is somewhat like a fingerprint, and the way they manage money reflects their unique point of view on the world. I am not here to tell you how to manage money with your partner. That is for the two of you to negotiate. I have met successful couples who do not have joint finances. They have an amicable agreement about who is taking care of what necessities. However, most couples adopt some sort of joint finances, and in these situations, there are some basic principles which tend to make managing money much easier. First, managing the family finances usually runs more smoothly when it is everyone's job. One of the classic mistakes made in managing money in marriages is to assign the job of money management to one partner or the other and leave the kids out altogether. This creates all sorts of dangers and traps which can be difficult to avoid. First, only one person's values are incorporated into the financial plan, or at least one person's values are usually highly favored. This often leads to resentment by the other spouse. In most relationships in which one person manages the money manager tends to act as a parent, and the non-manager tends to act like a child. The parent is put in the position of saying no to the desires of the child, and the child acts resentfully toward the parent. This isn't exactly a recipe for relationship bliss. I would argue, even if one person tends to manage the finances, all important financial decisions should be made by mutual agreement. This may make for some long and difficult conversations, but when both parties agree on what is to be done with the money, it helps keep resentment from building up in the relationship, and it keeps one partner from acting out in ways which undermine a family's ability to take care of their basic necessities. There is another reason to keep the family finances a project for both partners. I actually wouldn't mention it, but I have seen it too often in my counseling practice to avoid it. If one person acts as the financial manager and they make a mistake, sometimes they will hide that mistake from their significant other. It may not be an obvious mistake. They may simply not understand until very late in the game that their strategies for managing the family money cannot work. They will often try to fix the problem without letting their partner know what has happened. This problem can be easily avoided if both partners give their input into each financial decision. Then, when there is a major blunder, no partner is alone in taking the blame. In this way the family sinks or swims together. Next, the vast majority of conflict can be avoided if both partners' values are treated with equal respect. Think of this as extending the acceptance and grace we talked about in the last section to your spouse. I may absolutely have no interest in seeing our family money spent on new electronics, or new furniture. I may want it put toward a better family vacation, and I may feel taken for granted by my spouse. However, it will not help if I begin to judge them for their choices. As soon as I pass judgment, I will end up right back in the Chinese finger trap we discussed in the last section, because my spouse will most likely resist my efforts to shame them into doing what I want. If they don't openly resist, they will likely make their disapproval known somewhere else along the way. Acceptance and an attempt to understand will go a long way to keeping tough negotiations calm. If you believe your partner threatens the financial stability of the relationship with their spending, you will need to calmly ask them to examine their priorities. Then listen as they explain how they would accomplish their goal while protecting the safety of your household. You do not have to agree, and the most difficult financial negotiations happen here. If the two of you cannot agree, someone will have to compromise. For what it is worth, as long as both parties have negotiated in good faith, I believe it would be better to err on the side of caution when it comes to a family's financial stability. Disagreements may also arise because of a difference in priority when it comes to the money left over after basic necessities have been met. In the end, these decisions may come down to a serious horse trade or two in order to find a means by which both spouses can agree. For instance, if my partner wants to purchase a new iPad or another electronic gadget, I may ask for the same amount of money to go into the vacation fund, and that the planned trip to the Grand Canyon is extended by 1 day. Finding solutions which both parties see as equitable can be hard work, but it will really go a long way to both improving your relationship and keeping your family on track financially. In conclusion, it is much easier to manage a family's finances when both parties have adopted the same overall mission. To go back to the metaphor from the first chapter, it is very difficult to organize the strategies and tactics if the presidents cannot agree on what war they are to fight and what they want to accomplish. Helping partners adopt common financial goals is one of the reasons I am writing this book. My wife has noted, before we got our priorities straight when it comes to money we fought often, and our fights were almost never directly about money. Yet, after we got on the same page, 80% of our fights disappeared. Hard work here is worth the effort. As I said at the beginning of this section, there are as many ways to work with money in a relationship as there are relationships. But in my experience there are some ways which are more successful than others. Finding them and implementing them can be hard work. Remember, if you have joint finances, how your partner handles money can affect your ability to take care of the necessities of life. It is worth the effort to get on the same page. Banks, government, and other morality police. Before we move on from the topic of values, morality, and money, there is one other set of actors I need to mention. I have argued morality and money get all tangled up because the choices we make with our money are one of the truest measures of our actual values, and conflict often arises when we wish we valued something different. In order to begin to change the way we spend our money, we need to recognize and accept our current value system and how we use our money to support that value system. Once we accept our current system, it becomes much easier to change it and adopt a more useful set of priorities. It is worth taking a moment to remember there are those who do not want us to get our financial priorities straight, because it doesn't serve their interests. In the last chapter, I pointed out how a company's existence depends upon removing enough money from your pocket to keep them profitable. If they cannot accomplish this goal, they will cease to exist. Worse yet, publicly traded corporations have the express goal of maximizing the profit they make from you in order to give that profit to their stockholders. Companies will not hesitate to use shame, fear, and even morality to convince you to purchase their product. Listen to the traumatized children in any radio ad for OnStar, and you will quickly understand just how a company will go to get you to purchase their product. As a dad, I always want my children to be able to get help in an emergency. Don't I have a moral and ethical duty to purchase OnStar for them? Aren't I a failure unless I protect them with this necessary product? Nonsense, but very emotionally effective. The effect is all the more jarring because I am usually listening to my radios, and sudden vehicle is invaded by a traumatized child and 911 operator. I cannot say I haven't had an adrenaline rush listening to these actual calls. Frankly, I find that kind of marketing offensive, and being a bit of a rebel, I have decided I will never purchase OnStar until they quit interrupting my drive with an unwanted rush of fear. Your bank has no scruples regarding how they play on your emotions and sense of duty either. Their obligation is to their stockholders, not to your wallet, and their main product is dead, a product that is never good for your financial health. Banks are not your friend, and in the last few years they have stooped pretty low to convince you to keep purchasing their product. There are numerous ways in which banks attempt to keep you from changing your value system and financial goals. This isn't the time to go into all of them. I think you will begin to see them when you understand how high the stakes are for the bank. However, two different tactics are worth mentioning in the context of a conversation regarding values and morality, because they are such explicit attempts by financial institutions, companies, and the government to keep you from adopting healthy financial goals. Perhaps the best way to state this is to state it bluntly and then take some time to unravel the threads. Just do me a favor and practice that skill of reserving judgment before you slam the book closed in disgust. Here goes. No individual has a moral obligation to pay any of their bills. Now please don't misunderstand, I think you have all sorts of good reasons to pay your bills, including your own integrity. Let me be clear, I want you to continue to pay your mortgage if you can, as long as your mortgage serves the best interests of your family. However, the moment that mortgage interferes with your duties to your partner or your children, you have a much higher obligation to put their interests above those of the bank. This may mean that you choose to stop paying your mortgage and allow your home to be taken by the bank, which is their right. Especially since the start of the housing crisis, I have been hearing commentator after commentator decry the evils of those who are no longer paying their mortgages. Some of them, even some of the smarter consumer financial experts, have argued homeowners have a moral obligation to pay. I vehemently disagree with this point of view. Perhaps the easiest way to understand why I have no moral obligation to pay is to ask the question whether or not my bank feels a moral obligation to me. What will happen if, through no fault of my own, I am no longer able to pay my mortgage? If I am not able to find work in the next few months, will my bank feel any moral obligation to me when 6 months goes by and it is time to foreclose? Will they feel any obligation to keep my children from becoming homeless at the expense of their stockholders? Absolutely not. Nor should they. They have a duty to their stockholders, and I have a duty to my children. They will make a business decision based on profit and the stipulations of the contract I signed. They will point out to me, I have violated the contract, and they will take the action which the laws of the state allow them to take. They will take away my home, and if I have not made other arrangements, they will leave me homeless. That is their right under the contract I signed and the laws of Washington, my home state. So if the bank feels no moral obligation to me when I fall on hard times, why am I morally obligated to them? Why am I obligated in some way to accept such an Let me put this plainly, if the bank feels no moral obligation to me, but rather only a contractual obligation, then I have no moral obligation to them either. I have a contractual obligation to the bank. That contract states the consequences for me if I break it, and the bank is free to execute the consequences accordingly, but I have no obligation to them beyond that contract. I do, however, have a deep moral and ethical obligation to my partner and my children. If paying my mortgage is no longer in their best interest, then I have a duty to stop paying my mortgage and accept the consequences. The attempt to morally obligate me to the bank is such an obvious fallacy. It is a sign of how far we have been drawn into the tactics of corporate bank marketing that we don't immediately begin to laugh when someone repeats the lie. Perhaps it is because so many men and women in suits sit on CNBC and fulminate about evil homeowners that we are taken in. They all look like they know what they are talking about. The second area where banks have been very successful in convincing us to morally obligate ourselves to them has been through the credit score system. I cannot tell you how many clients walk into my office and tell me proudly, they have never been late on a payment to their credit card company. Then I look at their monthly expenses and find, while they have never been late to the credit card company, they have no emergency fund, skimp on food and cannot repair their car. Yet huge amounts of their value and worth seem to be invested in the fact they have made their payments on time. Ridiculous. Let's take that seriously for a second. If the goods and services you purchase with your money are a true reflection of your values, then a person who pays their credit card before feeding themselves has been so hijacked by bank marketing and scare tactics they actually value the bank's interests more than their own health and that of their family. This kind of thinking needs to stop. Please do not misunderstand, I believe strongly in personal integrity, and paying your bills is almost always in the best interests of your family, so you should do so on time. Besides, when I give my word to someone, I need to follow through on what I said for my own sense of self-respect. I should be embarrassed if I cannot keep my word. However, when I use a credit card or when I borrow money from a bank, I have not given them my unconditional word. I have signed a contract. The contract and the law stipulate the limited consequences if I do not follow through with my end of the bargain. These enlightened limits keep me from having to sell my children into slavery if I cannot pay. On the other hand, I believe that I do have a nearly unlimited ethical and moral responsibility to myself and my family. If my debts are causing me to no longer meet my moral and ethical duty to my family, I have no moral obligation whatsoever to my bank. That thinking is a lie which serves the interests of the bank at the expense of children and families. It is wrong. The congregation may now rise and turn with me to page 35 in their hymnal where we will sing. I hope this chapter demonstrates the need for a kind of radical honesty with ourselves when it comes to our financial choices. For some of us, it will be painful to look at the money we wasted when today we are facing such financial insecurity. It can also be painful to try to negotiate with spouses and others regarding financial matters. However, in the end, such hard work is worth it if we can reprioritize our spending and put our family's financial stability above our desires for financial freedom. If we can agree to keep our financial stability foremost in our financial choices, we will go a long way toward changing our American culture and returning to the sense of prosperity and security we all desire. To secure your basic needs both now and in the future, and to do nothing which would harm your ability to secure them on an ongoing basis. I recently had lunch with a gentleman at which we were reminiscing about the good old days. Before the recession hit, he had had a pretty good sales career, making a six-figure salary. He used to custom order suits and shirts with monogrammed cuffs. Now, he figured, his monthly budget would be workable if he brought in around $3,000 a month. It wasn't a lament. What amazed my lunch partner was how his tastes and definitions of needs had changed. Both of us marveled at how much less complicated our lives had become when we removed the pursuit of status and wealth from our financial thinking. Is it any wonder that concerns about status and wants lead to poor financial thinking? Human desire is an unlimited and boundless ocean, a body of water which can never be filled. If we make our wants and our desires for status our financial mission, we are doomed to fail from the start, because just as we think we have made it, there is always another hill to climb. When asked how much money was enough, John D. Rockefeller is said to have replied, "Just a little bit more." Satisfying all of our material wants and desires is not an achievable financial goal even for the wealthy, let alone for us mere mortals. If we are going to return to a healthier financial and economic situation in our country, such financial goals are best abandoned. However, achieving a kind of financial stability which allows us to sleep at night through all but the most disastrous of economic hurricanes can be achieved. This route may never provide us with a second home at the beach, but living by this goal, we can make sure that we do our best with what life brings. The funny thing is, when we make financial stability our goal, most of us find that we are more satisfied with our lives. Many of us will also be able to sleep at night for the first time in a long time. Considering all the tricks and traps we use to avoid the truth of our financial situation, our unconscious mind may have a better handle on our new reality than we do. It keeps waking us up, telling us to change course. Whether we understand it or not, freedom from want is back as the American dream. Strategies. In the previous section of our book, we looked at how we as a nation tend to set goals for our personal finances which have caused huge problems for our society. We saw how our current culture puts its efforts into purchasing luxury and status items, because until 2008 our society ably met the basic needs of a large majority of its hard-working citizens. I argued this culture of perceived status and luxury has made it very difficult for many of us to recognize our current economy no longer guarantees the basic needs of hard-working Americans. I believe it is time for Americans to re-adopt a simpler and healthier American dream, a dream in which we seek financial stability rather than wealth creation. But what does financial stability look like? How do we measure it? This chapter is meant to give you a start on answering those questions for yourself. Consider it an overview of topics you need to think about in order to evaluate your current level of financial stability. Is your boat sinking? To begin thinking strategically about your personal finances, I want you to ask yourself, on a month-to-month basis, am I able to pay all of my bills without using credit? I am always surprised at how many people think it is normal to use credit to purchase the basic necessities of life. I often use the metaphor of a boat to help them understand their situation. Think of your household finances as a boat. If on a month-to-month basis you are able to pay all of your bills, then your boat is watertight. It is not leaking. However, if you are deeply in debt and on a month-to-month basis you use credit cards or some other means to get by, you have two problems. Most people have come to my financial counseling office for the most obvious but least worrisome problem: their financial boat is full of debt. Often these people were just inches from sinking when they walked in the door to ask for advice as a last-ditch effort to avoid the bankruptcy attorney down the hall. They believed their current debt payments were their primary problem. However, as I looked at their financial situation, I found for many of these folks they had a second, much more serious problem. In many cases, their expenses on a month-to-month basis were significantly greater than their income. Their financial boat had a great big hole in it, and they were only worried about emptying out the boat. As I explained to these clients, they could go ahead and file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy and clear out the boat, but if on a month-to-month basis they did not make any changes, they would soon be right back in the same position. Next time they would not have the option of clearing out the boat with a bankruptcy, because Congress has caught on to that little scheme and now only allows a borrower a single Chapter 7 bankruptcy every 8 years. Eventually, when their boat is full of water again and they cannot pay their bills, their creditors would begin garnishing their wages to pay back their debt. When the garnishments start, it would become 25% harder to make ends meet. So I ask you, on a month-to-month basis, can you get by without borrowing money? Do you have enough income to meet all of your needs? Some of you will instantly know the answer is no. You already understand changes are necessary, either income must come up or expenses must go down. Your boat has a leak, and no matter what else you do to solve the problem, you need to fix that leak or your boat will sink. Hang in there. There is a way forward even if you cannot see it yet. Some readers will confidently answer yes, and some of them will be right. But are you sure? Have you ever really added it up, or are you just saying that because there is always money in your checking account? At the beginning of a downward debt spiral, there is always money in the checking account because the debt service payments are not yet big enough to be a problem. Yet when you add up your expenses and include those items you purchase on credit, you may very well have expenses that outstrip your income. So again I ask, do you really know whether or not you are making it on a month-to-month basis? Some of you will be shocked to find out the answer is no. Still another more interesting group will answer, I don't know. This is the group that needs to spend some heart-to-heart with their bank statements and credit card bills. At least you are honest about your denial. You have that going for you. That is better than the people who say yes but have never really looked at it. However, any kind of progress you hope to make toward financial stability requires you to know exactly where you are financially at all times. For those of us who are facing real financial hardship, accurate knowledge of our weak financial situation can be very frightening. Believe me, I personally understand. It terrifies me to know that as I write I have no reliable means by which I can continue to pay my mortgage. But if I am going to make good decisions about where I put my scarce dollars, then I better know exactly what kind of dangers I am facing and make sure my money goes to those needs. Don't worry, I won't leave you high and dry. In the tactical section of the book, we will deal with practical and simple ways to know exactly how much money you have at any moment in time, and they don't include writing down all your expenses every month. Right now, all I want is for each group to recognize that finding financial stability is impossible if you have a monthly budget which requires you to borrow money to live. It just won't work. In order to accomplish our goal of financial stability, one of our strategic plans must be to live without using debt for regular monthly expenses, except in extreme emergencies. So what are your basic necessities anyway? Our culture of status and luxury has warped the meaning of the word need like no other. All of us, not just our children, are prone to see our needs in overly broad terms. For those of us trying to adopt financial strategies which lead toward financial stability, it is a worthwhile exercise to consider just what goods and services we should prioritize with our limited resources. In order to avoid all the excesses of the word need, let's step out of our financial thinking for a moment and start with a bit of a blank slate, shall we? What must human beings have to continue to live? Proper food and water, clothing, shelter, and air come to mind. So far the last one remains free. Although I am sure that if your local government could find a way to tax the oxygen you use, they would. However, human beings must work to acquire each of the other three basic needs: food, clothing, and shelter. In fact, almost all human effort since the dawn of our species has been spent to support these three needs. Take a moment and see again the picture I presented earlier. You are standing with your last month's pay in hand, looking out over all the landscape, and in front of you are all the goods and services you could purchase with your money. It is a world of almost infinite possibility. If you seek to fulfill your mission of increasing your financial stability, you need to find ways to direct your finite money toward those goods and services which assist you in providing for your basic needs, before allowing it to slip away toward your wants. Only after you have purchased the goods and services necessary to provide for these needs on an ongoing basis do you have extra money in your budget. I want to emphasize, securing your basic needs does not only mean you purchase food, clothing, and shelter themselves. You also need to purchase those items which assist you in securing your basic needs. The most obvious example in our society would be transportation. Most of us are not able to walk to work, which means that we need to purchase some form of transportation in order to be able to continue to earn money. Other examples of goods and services which support the core needs of a human are items like electricity and natural gas, both of which play a huge role in nutrition and warmth. Once again, each household's situation is unique, so what you purchase in order to provide food, clothing, and shelter may be very different than what other people purchase. There are no right or wrong answers here. Just keep in mind, financial stability requires you to secure your basic necessities before you spend money on other items. Protect your future stability. There is one necessary item which is left out by more Americans than any other. Americans forget to purchase stability in the future. At some point in time, your monthly expenses or income will change suddenly. Perhaps you will have a car accident, God forbid, your partner will suddenly get cancer or you will lose your job. We may not know which financial disaster will land at our door, but we do know some kind of financial disaster will come. Beyond actual food, clothing, shelter, and everything needed to support those necessities, an emergency fund is the single most important item to purchase in a household budget. Yet in many American households their credit card is their emergency plan. This is a very poor plan which often turns what is a small emergency in the moment into a financial crisis down the road. In many households, emergencies are handled in the following manner. The car breaks down. The repair costs $600. Since the household has no savings, a credit card is used to pay for the repairs. A typical payout at a reasonable 12% interest rate, using minimum payments, would take nearly 5 years to pay off and cost around $170 in interest. If your interest rates are at a penalty rate of 21.9%, you would pay nearly $459 of interest over 6 years, making the actual cost of the car repair over $1,000. Multiply this figure by several times each year, and it becomes clear, many American families are losing hundreds of dollars each year on emergency interest alone. Now imagine what happens to a family with no savings if someone gets fired or laid off. How will they afford the extra credit card payments each month? With an all too common large-scale emergency, things quickly spiral out of control, and the family suddenly faces some very tough choices, like giving up their home or filing for bankruptcy. Now what happens if the same family prepays for their inevitable car repair or lay off with savings? First of all, they instantly put all the interest back in their pockets, leaving them money for a nice trip each summer. More importantly, the emergency does not automatically change their monthly expenses. Next month they don't have any extra payments. Between these two items, they have a much greater financial stability than the household which has no savings and uses its credit card for an emergency. I recognize, many of you will think it is not possible to actually pay for savings each month. You will say that your budget can't handle it. For some of you this may be true. There are times where you may not be able to put any money aside. There are those of us who are putting all our income towards securing our food, clothing, and shelter, and there is literally nothing left over. I want to affirm, you are doing a great job with your finances. Financial stability is much more about doing the best with what you have and not about achieving a certain level of income. Yet the harsh reality is that you may be doing the best you can and still end up with debt in an emergency. If at all possible, find a way to squeeze more blood from the turnip and put some money away. However, for most of my readers this isn't the case. For most of us, we are happy paying interest and ignoring our need for savings. We happily pay a $200 cable bill and pay for unlimited data on our cell phone without hesitation and don't put anything away for the future. We pay extra on our credit cards each month because we want to relieve the pressure, but we don't put any money away. Then when the next emergency comes, we use our credit cards again. What a vicious cycle. For the majority of us, the reality is, we can afford savings. We just don't want to change our lifestyle in order to have better security. In that case, we need to quit saying we can't afford to save and be more honest with ourselves about what we truly value. I will give you a hint. If you are paying for cable and not saving for an emergency, you value cable more than you value your ability to pay for food, clothing, and shelter for your family. A financial roadmap. Financial stability isn't so much about how much income you make or whether you rent or buy your home, and you may pursue financial stability with all your might and still take steps backward at times. Financial stability comes from doing the best with what you have. On the other hand, pursuing financial stability isn't a hindrance toward building wealth either. On the contrary, by taking care of first things first, you are much more likely to build permanent or semi-permanent wealth than your neighbor, who pursues a wealthy lifestyle right out of the gate. A wealthy lifestyle without savings is like a house of cards balanced on the head of a pin. So what should we do with our money when we have purchased our food, clothing, shelter, transportation, emergency savings, paid all the rest of the bills, and we have something left over? Without a plan for our extra money, it is likely to be blown on consumer goods without protecting our stability in the future. This will just lead to trouble down the road when an emergency comes. We need a financial roadmap, a lifelong strategic plan which can provide a compass point toward which we march. We need a path toward stability. The basics of this plan come from the radio personality and author Dave Ramsey. I have already mentioned that I respect Ramsey's work. His principles are right. Yet he still tends to think like someone who always has a surplus. For instance, on his monthly budget form he places both charitable giving and savings above food, clothing, and shelter. I disagree here. In reality, your basic needs come before savings. If I differ from him, it is because I write as someone who has worked hard but isn't wealthy. Those of you who are familiar with his work will recognize these as his baby steps. I have adjusted them to reflect the differences in the way I think. Your financial roadmap. Step 0. On a monthly basis, make sure you are not spending more than you earn. Make sure your boat is not leaking. Step 1. Secure your basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter. Step 2. Create a $1,000 emergency fund. Keep this money in a cash-based account such as a money market fund or savings account. Step 3. Pay off all debts as fast as possible, other than your home. This includes student loans, medical bills, and credit cards. Step 4. Increase your emergency fund to 6 to 10 months of your basic needs. Step 5. Begin saving 15% of your income for retirement. Step 6. If so desired, save for your child's college education. Step 7. Pay off your mortgage early. Step 8. Express your values with your money. You have taken care of your responsibilities, now be who you were meant to be. One of the tricks to using this plan is to recognize that you will go back and forth between the steps many times over the course of your life. For instance, let's say that you have built your $1,000 emergency fund and then have begun to hammer away at your debt. It feels great to be making progress, doesn't it? But then a car repair or a medical bill suddenly takes your $1,000 and cuts it down to $200. You then need to move backwards from step 3 to step 2 and replenish your emergency fund before you pay anything more than the minimum required on your credit card debt. In this current economy, there will be many families, like my own, who will bounce back and forth between steps 0 through 3 of this plan. It may take years to get to step 4. This same back and forth may continue for much of your life. You may be toward the end of paying off your mortgage early and be suddenly laid off. You quickly trim the budget and, for the next 11 months, you look hard for work. Welcome to the Great Recession. In order to cover your now reduced monthly expenses, you worked through about half your emergency savings when you add it to your unemployment. So what happens when you finally take that new job with more responsibility but at 70% of the salary you had before? Pay cuts, just another wonderful benefit of our current job market. The simple answer is to look at where you are on the steps above and move back to the step which is not longer completed, complete it once again, then move forward. In many cases, this would mean placing retirement spending on hold, and telling your teenager he gets to consider studying harder for scholarships or to go to community college, while you work to bring your emergency fund back up to full strength. I have found no better roadmap to bring financial stability to a household. It is simple, clear, and precise, but it isn't the end-all and be-all of financial thinking either. Perhaps you could do better, or you like a different plan. As long as your strategic plan supports the mission to create financial stability, that is all good. By far, the most important point in this section is to have a plan. If you do not have a plan for your surplus income, you may soon find yourself with wonderful new furniture but no home to put it in. Families who use these 8 steps as a financial roadmap have a great shot at making strides toward financial stability. However, unless they commit to avoiding the use of debt in all but the most dire of personal circumstances, their efforts are in vain. Debt undermines all efforts to increase our financial stability. Understanding how debt affects household finances and why it is to be avoided in most circumstances will be the topic of our next chapter. Follow a financial roadmap. Sometimes in order to fix a problem, you have to do a little cleaning first. You have to recognize the way you did things before didn't work. It is time to clear your head. All the stratagems, schemes and plans you have used to get by need to be put aside in order to put something new in their place. Consider this a chance to clear off a desktop buried under all these failed attempts to feel better financially and find the hard surface underneath it all. Take a moment and just sweep all those plans and dreams onto the floor. Clean off your mental desk. Don't worry, just because your plans are on the floor doesn't mean you won't be able to accomplish them. In fact, sometimes by taking a step sideways you might be able to accomplish them much faster than you hope. Do you have a clean surface to work with? Good. It is time to get back to financial basics. The money you make is the money you spend on a monthly basis. Spend it on meeting your immediate needs first. Then use your surplus to secure your basic needs in the future. It is that simple. A financial roadmap is a vital tool to keeping us on track over the long term. Here is the irony: the more dedicated you become to taking care of first things first, the more money you will have left over each month to do the things you want to do, including all those plans you just swept onto the floor. So I may be pushing our military metaphor a bit too far here, but, in certain ways, a credit card reminds me of a nuke. As a refresher, let me remind you we have been looking at useful strategies to implement in order to help us all achieve the mission of financial stability. In military thinking, the president determines the mission, and the military decides on the strategies necessary to accomplish the mission. The daily activities they use to carry out their strategies are called tactics. This kind of thinking makes almost all weapons tactical. They are the means by which the military implements their strategies. Then there are nukes. There are some nukes which the military considers tactical. They are intended for use on the battlefield in order to help fulfill a tactical purpose. These tend to be smaller nuclear weapons. Yet most nukes are so powerful, to use them goes well beyond any tactical purpose and becomes a military strategy in itself. They are called strategic weapons. To understand the term strategic weapons, simply think back to the 2 times nuclear weapons were used in combat: the destruction of 2 cities in Japan by our country during World War II, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The United States reasoned, correctly, that Japan would surrender rather than face the ongoing use of these brutal weapons. This would, reasoned the military, save hundreds of thousands of American servicemen who would have been lost if our country had been forced to invade Japan. So the use of these weapons moved beyond a mere tactic of battle, they became a strategy to end the war. The use of a nuke to accomplish the president's goals became a strategy in itself, thus the term strategic weapons. problem with nukes and other strategic weapons is they come with all sorts of crazy consequences which are not very healthy for the planet or the soul of the nation which uses them. One teensy-weensy example would be the callous deaths of hundreds of thousands of civilians along the way to accomplishing the surrender of Japan. All of these features of a nuclear weapon tend to remind me of credit cards and other consumer debt products. Credit cards in particular have the power to instantly change any financial situation and make it feel better for the cardholder. If I don't have enough money to pay my phone bill, pull out the credit card. If I don't have enough money to pay for food, pull out the credit card. If I cannot live without spending at least $900 on Christmas gifts each year, pull out the credit card. Around $900 is the average amount families in the United States report spending on Christmas presents. In fact, credit cards are so powerful at changing any financial decision-making process. For most American households, they are no longer even considered a tactic to be used at the appropriate time. Is there one? They have become a strategy used for survival. Yet they and other debt products have all sorts of toxic effects on our financial behavior. Worse yet, when a household begins to see them as necessary for everyday living, they shape and change that household's financial thinking in ways which are highly self-destructive. Credit cards and conditioning, getting used to taking bad bets. The credit card is an amazingly efficient tool for changing our financial thinking and teaching us to take unnecessary risks, because the first bet rarely, if ever, goes bad. Since the first bet appears to have worked, we make another and another and another. After a while, we become conditioned to making bets with our money. Only after we have made many bets do we find ourselves in financial trouble. By that point, the better lifestyle the credit cards seem to provide is far out of reach because the debt service payments take so much of our income. However, to cure the problem we would have to adopt a lifestyle which is below even our current diminished expectations, and that is a bridge too far. We find ourselves afraid of doing without our debt, and our credit card has become a source of comfort and solace in our disappointment. It does amaze me how many people walk into my financial counseling office and have no concept they do not need to own a credit card. By the time they are in financial trouble, their credit card is such an ingrained part of their financial existence they are unable to remember life without it. They are terrified they will not be safe unless they have at least one credit card for emergencies. For many, their first credit card came when they were in college, and there has been no adult financial life without one. Like an abused spouse, they don't recognize that their credit card is the source of their misery. Instead, they feel emotionally attached to it. They get defensive and misty-eyed if I suggest they go without it. Come on folks, it is only a piece of plastic. Many of these consumers go along quite successfully for a while. They kind of reach a balance point between their debt service payments and their incomes. The banks love these households because they no longer have any hope or intention of trying to pay off their debt. They reward them with high credit scores, which the borrowers work very hard to maintain. Yet, each month their budget feels like a stretch because they have just enough money for their basic necessities and their debt service payment. They don't yet feel the true pain of their situation because any new extras are being put on the credit card. They don't realize if they simply paid cash for the same items they purchased each month, they would have much more money to spend simply by avoiding the interest payment they make on their credit cards. Often the best way for this kind of consumer to understand what their credit cards cost them is for them to look at the amount of money they would have in their pocket each month if they did not have to make a credit card payment. The truth is, most often these households do not have an income problem. They have plenty of money. Instead, their debt service payments put huge chunks of money in other people's pockets. Just for a moment, once again see yourself standing with last month's earnings in hand and all that you could do with those earnings spread out before you. Now, I want you to see yourself taking a large wad of that money out of your own hand and walking away with it into the past. This is what happens when we use a credit card. We take from our future selves, in order to have what we want in the present. What makes this even worse is we pay for the privilege of robbing ourselves in the future. Households which use credit cards pay hundreds of dollars annually for the privilege of having a worse lifestyle in the future. What an amazing scam. If you want to trip yourself out, go and add up all the credit card interest you paid last year. Then consider what kind of vacation you could have bought your family with that same money. As I said earlier, human desire is an unquenchable ocean. Once you let it control your finances, many foolish choices become possible. Leverage, the other side of the coin. I am not alone in my assessment of credit card debt. There are many writers, authors, and speakers in the personal finance world who also stress debt reduction and elimination as the best way to increase your family's financial stability, Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman being particularly passionate examples. Unfortunately, we do not control the culture and we probably never will. Debt is big business in the United States. There is too much money to be made by selling debt to you. Of course, there are those who make highly effective and compelling arguments that debt is a normal part of human existence and paying interest to someone else should be part of every family's strategy for managing their money. It is worth noting, a majority of these proponents of some types of personal debt benefit in some way by keeping you in debt. For instance, most financial advisors make a commission off the products they sell, or they make a percentage of the assets they manage. Either way, this gives them a vested interest in arguing you should keep your debt and use your savings instead to purchase the various financial products they sell. It makes them money. Again, let me remind you that business people, including financial advisors, are very serious about what they do. I know, I was a financial advisor for a while. For them, selling you a financial product means the difference between making their mortgage payment and losing their home. Because they take it so seriously, it is worth taking a moment and considering some of their arguments. Like all effective arguments, it begins with a piece of the truth. Debt can provide the ability to make your money do more for you than you could otherwise. In the financial world, this is called leverage. This is mathematically possible. According to many financial advisors, my bank, the car dealer and any other person who has a vested interest in selling me a car loan, if I have $10,000 and need a car, I should not pay cash for the vehicle. Rather, I should borrow the money for my vehicle and use that money to do other work for me. For instance, a financial advisor will point out if I borrow for a vehicle at 5% for 6 years and invest in a mutual fund which has averaged an 8% return over the last 10 years, then I will come out better in the end. Of course, this is assuming you do invest that $10,000 and don't just spend it right away. The math says so, doesn't it? Sure it does. If I put no money down and borrowed at 5% on the vehicle, I would make payments of $157.16 each month and pay a total of $11,316. So the cost of the vehicle is $11,316. During the same time frame, I would earn 8% on my money and make $15,869. That means at the end of the 6-year time frame, I have $4,553 that I wouldn't have had if I had paid cash for the vehicle. That is a lot of money, isn't it? What's not to like? What's not to like is all the risk which the simple math does not calculate into the scenario. Let's start with the easiest risk to spot. If your mutual fund has given you an 8% return for the last 10 years, will it give you that return for the next 6? There is no way to know. Really, that depends on the stock or bond markets. It depends on the economy for the next 6 years. It depends on the wisdom of the people managing the mutual fund in the next 6 years. Really, there is no way to tell. What can be said is that for the last 10 years the people who bet their money with this mutual fund received an 8% return. That is so much different than saying you will get a better return if you borrow on the vehicle and purchase a mutual fund with the money. Please don't get me wrong. I think that mutual funds are great investments, and I suggest that when you save for retirement you use them wisely. However, right now we are trying to determine whether or not you should use them to make money while you borrow on a vehicle. That is a different story, and the return on the investment isn't the only risk that you take when you use leverage. Next, one must consider the risk to the family finances of the payment. For the next 6 years the family budget needs to be able to tolerate another $157 a month in payments. In any economy this isn't a guarantee, let alone our current economy, in which it is very possible for any one of us to end up with the same job with more responsibility for 30% less pay. So what might be affordable today might not be affordable tomorrow. Again, this risk is almost impossible to calculate. So now we have two risks, which we must calculate in order to understand how they affect our choice to borrow money rather than pay cash for a vehicle. The final risk which must always be considered when one is going to borrow money is the risk of default. That is, what happens if you cannot pay? What happens if in the next 6 years you lose your job? What kinds of stress will you face then, compared to if you had paid cash? If you lose your job, not only do you have to worry about food, clothing, and shelter, but now your transportation is also under threat. That is one more stress which you don't need. Do you know what happens when you do not pay on your car? It gets repossessed and they sell it. You owe the difference between what they sell it for and what you owe, which shouldn't be that much if you have a decent loan, right? Wrong. When your vehicle gets repossessed, they sell it at about 25 to 30 cents on the dollar. If the retail value is $8,000 and you owe $10,000, you end up with a collections bill between $7,600 and $8,000 on a vehicle that you no longer own. So now you have to find alternative transportation so you can keep working to support your family, and you have another $8,000 in debt to add to your credit card bills. Double that if you borrowed $20,000 so you could drive that Prius. Consider how much you owe if you borrowed $30,000 plus for that new SUV with the built-in DVD player you needed for your children. While very few people actually calculate these risks before they go borrow money to purchase a car, even fewer people recognize that these risks are cumulative. That is, each risk happens independently of the others. In other words, all three of the risks listed above might come true at once. More importantly, since they act independently of each other, you need to add them together to get a true picture of whether or not this plan will succeed. In other words, if there is a 20% risk that your mutual fund bet won't work and a 15% risk that you get a worse job for the same pay, plus another say 10% risk you lose your job in this bad economy, then what was a sure thing when you did the math suddenly only has a 61% chance of success. Doesn't sound like such a good deal anymore, does it? This is especially true when you calculate in the extra stress on the finances created each month by your car payments, which for some of you can be upwards of $700 to $900 per month for two vehicles. I know. I have seen household budgets just like yours. I don't know what the exact risk of failure is on this kind of a car loan bet. It probably isn't as high as I made it. But the truth is, it is nearly impossible to calculate, and failure can't be calculated by just the repossessions either. There are a huge number of people who make their payments but are suffering for their decisions to take on debt. They may be skimping on other items or unable to pay their mortgage. Or simply, their mutual funds may be way down while they are paying interest on the car. They have lost their leverage bet. Before you waste your time either feeling dumb or macho about your ability to calculate risk, remember even the math PhDs at AIG, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and the like couldn't calculate risk. They were making bad bets just like you and me. Frankly, there is more and more scientific evidence to show human beings don't calculate risk well. This is why I believe if financial stability is your goal, then debt should be avoided if at all possible. I would rather drive an old jalopy than borrow money for the status of having a car payment. I would rather have to wait a couple of months to save the money before spending a weekend away with my wife rather than pay interest on it later. Don't get me wrong, I am not someone who is cheap. I love nice things, and I hate my 2000 Chevy Astro. But every time I do the math on whether or not it is worth it to purchase something different, it never makes sense to me. My current car runs great, and frankly not having a payment provides so much financial stability to my children, I can't see doing otherwise. I still hate the car though. Admitting that you are not qualified to calculate risk takes humility. It also takes the ability to be countercultural. We love to tell the stories of the winners. Lottery winners make the papers. Lottery losers don't. We love to tell the story of the stockbroker who slept in a bathroom with his son while in training and then got his Lamborghini. We don't like to tell the story of the 6 other guys who worked just as hard and ended up homeless. That's kind of a downer. If we are going to get over our obsession with wealth and status in order to find financial stability, we have to be willing to tell more honest stories, and we have to be willing to be humble enough to avoid unnecessary risk for the sake of status. What to do if you are in credit card trouble? Some of you are out there saying, "Enough already? I know I am in trouble. I just want to know what to do about it." That is why I picked up the book. Thanks for your patience while I brought some of your fellow readers along. So what do you do if you find yourself in financial trouble? What can you do about your credit card payments? Once again, credit cards open you up to a lot of poor financial thinking, so one of the best things you can do is to slow down and think through your choices before you make any decisions. Quick decisions tend to be bad decisions. If you are serious about solving your problem, you must be radically honest with yourself. First off, you need to know if your boat is leaking on a monthly basis and how badly. You need to understand if your monthly spending is outstripping your income. Remember, it does little good to take the water out of the boat if you still have a leak. I will talk again later in the tactics section about very simple ways to know if you are making it on a month-to-month basis. For now, just remember your first step is to find out how bad your problem really is. For many households, an analysis of income and expenses will reveal simple lifestyle changes which will take care of the problem. For these households, they need to take the extras out of the budget, and then follow the financial roadmap laid out at the end of the previous chapter. For other households, their situation is more dire. They may already be at a skin and bones budget, and just barely getting by with their credit card payments. There may not be any more fat to trim. These households need to consider some outside help to solve their problem. There are places to go, and there are places not to go for that help. One tactic many consumers try at this point in their financial death spiral is to call their credit card companies. If they have a good payment history, they may be able to get from these companies some kind of temporary lower rate and payment in order to help them get back on their feet. These arrangements have the advantage of keeping the credit card open, which helps minimize the damage to the credit score, but most often they do not work. Typically, when a family needs to use one of these plans, they are already at the point where they have very little available in their budget to throw at their credit card. So the credit card company reduces the interest rate, and they reduce the payment. The family under stress quickly accepts the lower payment because it reduces the strain on their budget. Now the credit card company has them trapped. They now have some relief for the year they are offered the reduced payment. However, they make very little progress on their overall debt. Their lower payment doesn't allow them to reduce their principal balance much at all. At the end of the year, the credit card company simply puts their interest rate back to where it was. The stress returns, and the family has made little headway. In these scenarios, they are not very likely to actually pay off their debts, and this is just what the credit card company wants. The bank has maintained their hold on the consumer's pocketbook, allowing them to continue to extract money from the consumer to give to their stockholders. Another trap many families fall into when trying to dig out from credit card debt is the for-profit debt consolidation industry. Frankly, I think this industry should either be outlawed as a scam or highly regulated with disclosure rules. In most cases, their business model works in the following manner. The panicked consumer walks in the door, and the salesman offers a miraculous payment for all their credit card debts, which is significantly below their minimum payments. The grateful consumer signs up for the plan without understanding the for-profit company is well aware the consumer is in trouble. Once again, they are business people and take their existence seriously. So they do what any wise business would do when working with people who are almost bankrupt. They make sure to take their cut first. So the consumer pays their consolidated bill and doesn't realize that for the first 6 months or so the for-profit company doesn't pay a cent to the credit card companies. Then after that 6-month period in which the credit card company prepares to write off the debt consolidation company negotiates a settlement with the credit card company which pays much less than the borrower actually owes. All the while the consumer often has no idea what has happened. They are assuming that their credit cards are being paid each month. While I am not a big fan of worshipping your credit score, I don't see any reason to needlessly damage it either. Not paying your bills for 6 months isn't exactly easy on the credit score, and paying an amount which is less than the full amount you borrowed looks to many lenders like a kind of bankruptcy. Late payments or non-payments are bad enough, but when you don't make good on the debt in the end, that really doesn't look good. I doubt that most consumers intend to sign up for this kind of damage when they walk into a debt consolidation office. Then there is the matter of the profit the company is extracting from you for providing what I am not sure counts as a service. A better option for consumers struggling with consumer debt is to look for a non-profit credit counseling agency accredited by the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, NFCC. If possible, I encourage you to find a local office you can deal with on a face-to-face basis. This will help you avoid scams and give you a place to go to have your questions answered. The NFCC can be found online at nfcc.org. The 800 number to call for assistance is listed toward the top of their page. nfcc.org. The credit counseling agencies accredited by the NFCC offer debt management programs which repay 100% of what a consumer owes in a 5-year time frame, and they negotiate with creditors to get permanently lowered interest rates for the consumer. In return, the consumer agrees to do 2 things. First, they agree to a fixed consolidated payment. Second, consumers also agree to close credit cards paid by the program, so they cannot run up further debts causing larger losses for the credit card companies. In most cases, a debt management plan is much more modest on the consumer's credit score than the for-profit debt consolidation plans. There is some effect, because when a consumer closes credit cards, their available credit drops while their amount borrowed stays steady. This increases the ratio of amount borrowed to available credit. Credit rating agencies consider a borrower who has borrowed almost up to the limits of their available credit to be much greater risks than borrowers who have large amounts of available credit. However, unlike for-profit debt consolidation, this problem will cure itself as the debt management program goes along. The debts are paid down, and the ratio improves along with the credit score. Again, if you are facing this kind of credit card problem, the chances of escaping without damage to your credit score are about 0, so definitely seek the help you need, even if it hurts your score in the short term. Besides, if you are committing to living in a more financially stable way in the future, you won't be borrowing money anyway, so what does your credit score matter? Now that is a new thought, isn't it? Remember, credit score worship is just one way banks continue to take your money and give it to their stockholders. Stockholders. Finally, for some consumers it will become clear they have exhausted all their options to make their budget work. See Chapter 8. 8. On a month-to-month basis they can no longer make ends meet. At this point in time, it would be wise for them to discuss their options with a bankruptcy attorney. Remember, like with any other good or service, You get what you pay for, so make sure you interview several attorneys and find the one who makes you the most comfortable. When it comes to legal matters, cheapest isn't always the best value. So is that end of the story about debt? Just don't, ever. Not quite. There are a few circumstances in which the leverage argument can make sense, and these will be the subject of our next chapter. For now, however, I want you to remember debt always adds uncertainty to any situation, and most often it makes you poorer in the future. So if our mission is to increase our stability, then in almost all circumstances debt should just be avoided. Inevitably the question arises, are there ever times when borrowing money might be okay? The short answer is might be okay? The short answer is, it depends. How is that for my best imitation of an attorney? When I purchase a bond, I'm betting the borrower will have the cash flow to continue to pay back their debt to me. Investments are risks. It is the risk in the investment which causes it to pay you more than you put in. The larger the risk, the higher the potential payout should be in order to compensate for the risk. If a debt is large but only offers small reward, then that debt is not worth taking. The problem here is most Americans purchase their investments like they purchase consumer goods. If it feels right, they do it. Purchasing investments needs to be a more considered process than listening to Jim Cramer use an air horn. You laugh, but some of you still get your investment advice from television and wouldn't know how to analyze a stock or mutual fund if your retirement depended on it, and it does. Having said that, there are 3 different circumstances which come to mind in which it might be worth borrowing money. Each of them is worth looking at individually. Student loans. American dependency on debt starts early. In fact, some of the very earliest decisions we make as young 18-year-old adults lead to massive amounts of debt which haunt many of us for decades. The decision to go to college can do more financial damage than any other decision a young person makes. Don't get me wrong, I think that college is a good thing if done properly. I just believe a bachelor's degree which comes at a price tag of $40,000 or $50,000 in student loan debt is not always a good value. The issues here are complex, and I am hesitant to try to set out principles which may or may not work in a given circumstance, but I am confident enough to say that student loans need to provide a clear return on the investment, because they will likely be the second largest debt a person gets in their life. On top of that, the federal government in its wisdom has declared, in most circumstances, a borrower cannot remove student loan debt with a bankruptcy, which means the student will have to pay it off no matter what their financial situation after they take the debt. Taken together, these facts show young adults need to start asking serious questions about the value of their student loan debt before they accept it. In a job market where wages are stagnant at best and more likely sinking, is it really worth it to go deeply in debt for a degree that doesn't offer a clear path to higher wages on the other side? With the rising cost of tuition and the rising amounts of debt taken per student, it is certainly time to have such a conversation. College teaches many valuable things which are not on the diploma. However, does a more expensive private college provide such a vastly greater number of these developmental experiences to justify the cost when compared to a significantly cheaper state school? Perhaps, but maybe not. Again, I don't think there is any easy answer here. That isn't the point. Rather, like in all our financial thinking, the question of the relative value of one type of college education and degree over another has not often been asked. A friend of my wife decided she was not going to borrow in order to get her teaching degree. It took her more years to complete than her colleagues, and she used a local state school to pay for her degree, so the degree has no prestige associated with it. Frankly, it left her lower on the totem pole when the downturn came. In the union-controlled, seniority-driven world of the teaching profession, she has struggled to keep a job as a middle school math teacher. However, she doesn't have any debt, and unlike many others of her cohort who do have debt, she doesn't have student loan payments to consider while looking for work. This is allowing her to get by while others flounder. Once again, debt, even good debt, always adds risks to any situation, and less risk is almost always the better way to go. Considering the value of a degree doesn't always mean cheaper is better either. If you know exactly what you want to do, if you have examined your field and know your degree will provide employment, if both of these are true and you get into an Ivy League quality school, by all means take the debt. These schools clearly offer intangible opportunities like no other, and in most cases the risk will be worth it. But if you are paying private school tuition to earn even a decent regional degree, I think you have to truly ask yourself whether or not the extra intangibles at such a school outweigh the extra debt compared to a state school. Again, I am not against a college education. I have a couple of degrees myself, both from private colleges. However, I do think with rising tuition and sinking wages, the question of value must come into play when we consider education for a young person. We can no longer take such questions for granted. There is one other quick thing I want to mention about school debt before moving on. The question of value is even more important for an adult. As a financial counselor, I have seen many adults come into my office saying they have been laid off, and they are now going back to school in order to get a degree because there are no jobs available to them. In many cases, they are using student loans to buy food, clothing, shelter, and transportation while they study. Here is the kicker: most of the time, the retraining they are going through will not provide them with a high enough pay raise on the other end to make the amount of debt worth it. I have met massage therapists who have tens of thousands of dollars in debt for both their student loans and then getting their business started. This makes no sense financially whatsoever when you actually look at both the average lifespan and average wage of a massage therapist. I believe some of these folks don't know what to do to find a job which pays a living wage, so they are sitting in school until this whole recession blows by. I would argue this is not a good choice at all. Diplomas and education are products like other products, and colleges are in the business of selling them, even if they don't serve your needs. They take their job seriously, and if they can entice you to plunk down 30 grand for a relative. How to open a business and when to use debt in a business context are the subject of many books and frankly not my area of expertise. However, in most circumstances at the growing feeling of dread, fear, and the knowledge you will have to tell your significant other. Compare that reaction to this one: I can't believe we have the money in the bank for this. Make ends meet? When some of us would kill just for one middle-class job but can't even find that, what do I say? When some of us are working 2 or 3 jobs and still can't make ends meet, what can I say? Again, I come back to one of the mantras of the game. However, it will make it more difficult for you to determine just what you spent your money to purchase. If you have receipts, you will do better. If you don't have receipts, try to remember how much money you put in your wallet or purse over the last month and then try to account for where most if not all went. Please don't get too anal about this whole exercise. The goal here isn't to track our expenses down to the penny. Rather, I want you to know that you spend between $250 and $300 per month on gasoline, and that your bill for eating out was about $200 last month. So find the most recent copy of your bank statements and credit card statements, or go online and download them. If you use cash,
Mommy,
find your receipts or make a list of all your cash purchases. Then take each item you purchased and categorize it for yourself. You get to make the categories. I don't make them for you. Now, even though you get to make your own categories, how you set them up will determine what kind of control and feedback you get throughout the month on your spending. So, I would suggest you try to be specific about your needs versus wants. For instance, many people include personal products such as makeup, hair care, and soap, as well as household products such as paper towels and napkins in the same category as groceries. My wife and I personally don't do this, because we are much more willing to carry all of it around with us. We will divide it in two and leave most of it at home. This will be necessary for some of you considering where you live. I lived in Chicago for a couple of years, and there it was a totally different game. In that kind of place, you can bet I would never carry all my cash on me, at least not in one place. If you live in a place where carrying too much cash would make you feel unsafe, then take it out once a month, divide it up into envelopes and leave most of it in your home. This will keep you on track with your budget because your money is divided up at home. Then, either carry only a portion of it with you at any time, or carry a fixed amount which, depending on what you purchased, you replenish from the appropriate envelope when you get home. Besides, if we have an emergency fund, we should be able to get by without having too much trouble even if we did have our money taken. I think that would count as an emergency. Another thought here before I move along. If you are afraid that being mugged will cost you money and so unwilling to use cash, consider how much money you spend in interest charges each year. Which costs you more? Honestly, even if I still lived in Chicago, I would carry cash and I would still save money over using credit cards even if robbed once a year, which is unlikely. Earlier in the book, I talked about how I would teach you a feedback method which would instantly let you know if you need to adjust your budget. This instant feedback keeps small problems from becoming large and disastrous and helps you flex and change course. If you use cash for purchases, changing course, and adjusting to unexpected expenses can be as simple as looking at your cash. If during the month the latest Middle East crisis causes gasoline prices to spike, and you realize that you are going to have a problem, you simply look at your available cash and take some from another category in which you have a little to spare and put it in your gasoline category. Hopefully you took that out of your pocket money or another luxury category, right? Remember the picture of you holding your monthly earnings in your hand as cash and looking out over a vast sea of possible goods and services? You didn't think I meant that literally, did you? I did. Planning your cash flow. One last thought on spending your money before we move on and conclude. My wife and I have been so dedicated to this idea of working on a monthly budget, we have managed to get ahead. That is, over time, we moved from paying this month's bills with this month's income to paying this month's bills with last month's income. This means when we sit down to budget, we look at our checking account to see what came in last month, and that is the money we spend this month on bills and expenses. For some of you, this will make your planning much easier. However, for many of you, you will not yet be able to have such a luxury. You are paying this month's bills with this month's income. This means, as you start out, you will need to manage your cash flow for the month carefully. Approach your bills in the same way you approach your spending. Pay your necessities first, and let the cable company wait for a paycheck later in the month. For a while you may need to take cash out twice a month, or you may decide to run your bills from the 1st of the month to the 1st of the month and your cash budget from the 15th to the 15th. You can decide what way works best for you to manage your cash flow. Just be aware that over time, it makes it much simpler if you pay double on a bill here or there to get ahead. Then you can work on a more solid foundation by simply spending what came in last month on the bills and expenses you have for this month. This provides some cushion and improves your financial stability by causing you to spend only money you have already earned, no more estimated commissions, just the amount which came in last month. Liberation through limits. When you take care of your necessities first, spending money can be quite liberating. When I was first learning these principles, I remember a Dave Ramsey fellow traveler telling me about how much joy he and his family had while taking a vacation to Disneyland with cash. There was no hangover when they came home. He simply went back to work and kept moving forward. However, what amazed him most wasn't that he didn't feel guilty when he came home, it was how much fun he and his family had on the trip. Sure, they had to make some tough decisions. They packed their own food and drove down instead of flying, West Coast folks. They had to make some decisions along the way about what they wanted to do with their limited resources because they could afford to do everything they wanted to do. However, they involved their children in those choices, and the family made them together. What made it so great for him is that he didn't have to sweat spending the money, like he usually did on a vacation paid for with a credit or debit card. He knew that every expense had been accounted for before they left. Previously, when they traveled on a credit card, both he and his wife were afraid of every purchase they put on the card because they knew they couldn't pay for all of their spending when they got home. It wrecked all the fun because he felt anxious about the money the whole time he was away. Not a great way to relax on vacation, Ed. Why doesn't he just take his smartphone along and answer all his work emails every day? You do that on vacation? Seriously. However, when he budgeted for that vacation, he had much more fun even though he was making more decisions and limiting his choices based on his money. He was freer to be himself because he only purchased what he could afford, and it made him a better dad because he was less worried and irritable. He found he greatly increased the value of his vacation through financial limits. Putting limits on your spending and changing the way you spend money doesn't just help with big items. I remember what it was like not so long ago when my wife and I would go shopping for groceries. We would go with some kind of vague idea of what we had available for groceries for the week. We tended to use that quickie math system I talked about earlier, in which you simply subtract the bills from whatever is in the checking account and spend the rest. The problem was we never knew just how much we had to spend. This would lead to lots of little squabbles as we shopped. She would put a block of cheese in the cart, and I would worry that we were spending the money we needed to set aside for the power bill or pay overdraft fees. I would put a 6-pack of microbrew in the cart, and she would just shake her head no. I live near Portland, Oregon. What can I say? I am a beer snob. Inevitably we would end up in a crunch, because we had spent the power bill or received an overdraft. Notice, and the accusations would fly, well if only you hadn't. I swear these fights were so regular you could have set your clock by them. The funny thing is they seemed to magically disappear when we started living off a zero-balance budget. I trust my wife, I really do. And if she thinks we can afford that block of cheese or steak, then you won't hear me saying anything. I don't worry about what we spend on groceries and other items throughout the month, because I know that the electric bill has already been accounted for in our budget. Spending cash has been absolutely wonderful for creating trust in our relationship. For us, getting our priorities right and focusing our efforts on taking care of our basic needs first has paid both huge financial and personal dividends. Accepting limits, articulating them and living within them, has truly made what has been a difficult 4 years into something not only tolerable but worth celebrating. I cannot wait to see what our future holds. Putting the pieces together. Book-length ideas can be difficult to remember. Often there are too many useful nuggets to hold onto all of them and my brain says, chuck it all, and forgets everything, or I end up remembering just a few bits and pieces. I really don't want that to happen in this case. Wrapped up in the persuasion, asides, and ridiculous opinions are a few essential arguments which tie the chapters of this book together, and if you are willing to implement them, they provide a guide to surviving financial rough times. Time and again, I have watched families who need to change the way they live become overwhelmed with everything they are supposed to do and fail to make any changes at all. They often do not realize the problem is not so much what they are doing but rather what they are thinking. Change what you believe, and you will change what you do. Often for these families, it just feels easier to give up and allow the financial crisis they have created to take its course. In the short term it seems to work, and it is much easier. Unfortunately, if you abdicate your responsibility to live your own life, there really is no out for your humanity. Once you give in, you end up in a cycle of financial failure, which if taken to an extreme can destroy your ability to act independently. It has effects which last generations. I know, I have seen the damage such thinking can do to families. I have seen it in my own extended family. In my counseling, after observing such defeatist thinking, I began to use the classic military model of war planning to help organize my advice into something more than useful nuggets. It provided a strong thread on which to hang our thinking about financial matters. Thinking this way helped me to put all the pieces together in my own life and organize my activity toward a goal that made sense. Making sense of the whole plan has helped me keep going when I wanted to quit. Each dollar I held in my hand now had a purpose. They existed to express my values. Suddenly, I had a defined mission and path to a financial goal I could reach no matter what the economy created for me. Here then is a short summary of my financial plan. I hope it helps. If you follow it, I know what a difference it can make for you. Right now, I am right there with you scraping to get by. Stand with me. Don't forget, the 1930s came to an end, and when this passes, we will be a better people for it. Good luck, and don't give up. Your financial mission. To secure your basic needs both now and in the future, and to do nothing which would harm your ability to secure them on an ongoing basis. 3 strategies to accomplish your mission. 1. Follow a financial roadmap. 2. If at all possible, live without using debt. 3. Live below your means and save the rest for a rainy day. A financial roadmap which supports your mission. Step 0. On a monthly basis, make sure you are not spending more than you earn. Step 1. Secure your basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter. Step 2. Create a $1,000 emergency fund. Step 3. Pay off all debts as fast as possible, other than your home. Step 4. Increase your emergency fund until it reaches 6 to 10 months of your basic needs. Step 5. Begin saving 15% of your income for retirement. Step 6. If so desired, save for your child's college education. Step 7. Pay off your mortgage early. Step 8. Express your values with your money. Tactics which bring your strategies to life. Live by a zero balance budget, created at least monthly. Use cash whenever possible to avoid busting your budget. Many thanks for reading my book. I am very grateful for your support of my writing. I am a full-time writer and blogger living in Vancouver, Washington. I am an author of both nonfiction and fiction, as well as a contributor to the Geek Dad blog. On Wired.com, I write on a wide range of topics. When not waxing poetic on various aspects of fiscal responsibility, I tend toward the geeky. You can find more information about the things I have published below. When not poised over the keyboard, I love to spend time with my family. I am married to an angel, Jaylene, who has taught me more than anyone else about true mercy and compassion. We are the parents of 3 wonderful girls. As a group, we like swimming at the local pool, gardening, reading aloud, playing piano, and beating each other soundly at whatever tabletop game is handy. I always love to hear from my readers. If you enjoyed the book, the best way to give me feedback would be to post a review on Amazon.com. You can email me @erikwecks@gmail.com, or track me down on Twitter, @ErikWecks. You can find out more about what I am currently writing at ericwecks@gmail.com or ericwecks.com. There you can sign up for my monthly newsletter. If you are interested to see what else I have published, check out my authors page on amazon.com. How to manage your money when you don't have any. How to manage your money when you don't have any, workbook, coming 2013. The Hoa and Condo Association Board Members Survival Guide. How to protect yourself and the association, coming 2013. Brody, Hope Unconquered. A Pax Imperium short story. Moonrise. A Snowball's Chance in Hell, Volume 1, coming October 2012. Adrift. A Snowball's Chance in Hell, Final Volume, coming 2013.